When about 2 platoons of soldiers approached the ambush, ours opened a sudden fire. 7 or 8 men fell, and the rest, frightened, fled. On the right flank acted a battalion named Levski. It was attacked by a whole battalion of soldiers, but realizing that a trap was being prepared here, was forced to deploy at a decent distance from our positions. Before dusk, the enemy made several more attacks, trying to seize Bloody Stone and surround the detachment, but all his attempts failed ignominiously. All ended in useless losses. Toward evening, when the enemy's desire to continue the fight waned, our battalions attacked him, drove him back, and afterward abandoned the position and withdrew to Koyunitsa. The enemy lost 12 men killed. There were no casualties on our side. At Koyunitsa, the detachment was received with the same cordiality. Although we got there rather late, the people were up and had the ovens heated. We have just seen off some guests, and others have come, an old man told us. Which guest did you see off? Densho asked. Zaitan was here tonight. He had 30 recruits with him and had gone north. Densho understood that this was the result of mobilization by the party and shared his joy with his friends. After a few hours of rest, Densho gave the squad orders to follow Zlaitan's tracks. These tracks led to Kiane Trava. When the squad descended to the eastern edge of Kiane Trava, the peasants, organized into a local detachment, took up positions near the houses and prepared to fight back. Frightened and outraged by the atrocities of the fascists burning the villages, when they saw the soldiers' clothes of the Batavians, they mistook the partisans for the troops who had come here again and decided to die, but not to let the fascists make a mockery of their honor and life. However, when they realized that it was not the police, not the troops, but the partisans who were approaching them, they rushed to meet them. Still, this time the peasants were not too well disposed. In the ravine, where 10 days ago whitewashed one-story houses, now sadly blackened fire, the fascists had burned everything here. This heavy picture caused in the hearts of the partisans a sharp hatred for the pathetic servants of fascism, who burned and devastated the villages in the partisan areas. Deep disgust for the entire fascist system felt every honest man when he saw with his own eyes how half-naked and barefoot children, whose clothes and shoes were burned or taken away by the fascists, huddled together with the cattle in craters, hastily covered with wet straw, and together with the frozen and hungry children lay in the cold, hungry, wounded and sick partisans. The fires were not only in Kiane Trava. Fascist crimes were committed over a vast area, representing a new copy of the Turkish atrocities and former times in the Bulgarian villages of Perushtica and Bata. In both Kiane Trava and Kalna, even the fruit trees were burned, and the houses were replaced by deep holes, half-destroyed cellars. With inimitable patience and steadfastness, the population of Tri and neighbouring districts bore the police terror, and with unquenchable, inexhaustible faith they fought for their bright and joyful tomorrow. I bow before you, people's patience, faith and struggle. When about 2 platoons of soldiers approached the ambush, ours opened a sudden fire. 7 or 8 men fell, and the rest, frightened. On the right flank was a battalion named after Levski. It was attacked by a whole battalion of soldiers, but realizing that a trap was being prepared here, was forced to deploy at a decent distance from our positions. Before dusk, the enemy made several more attacks, trying to seize Bloody Stone and surround the detachment, but all his attempts failed ignominiously. All ended in useless losses. Toward evening, when the enemy's desire to continue the fight waned, our battalions attacked him, drove him back, and afterward abandoned the position and withdrew to Koyunitsa. The enemy lost 12 men killed. There were no casualties on our side. At Koyunitsa, the detachment was received with the same cordiality. Although we got there rather late, the people were up and had the ovens heated. We have just seen off some guests, and others have come, an old man told us. Which guests did you see off? Densho asked. Zaitan was here tonight. He had 30 recruits with him and had gone north. Densho understood that this was the result of mobilization by the party and shared his joy with his friends. After a few hours of rest, Densho gave the squad orders to follow Zlatan's tracks. These tracks led to Kiane Trava. When the squad descended to the eastern edge of Kiane Trava, the peasants organized into a local detachment, took up positions near the houses and prepared to fight back, frightened and outraged by the atrocities of the fascists burning the villages. When they saw the soldiers' clothes of the Batavians, They mistook the partisans for the troops who had come here again and decided to die, but not to let the fascists make a mockery of their honour and life. However, when they realized that it was not the police, not the troops, but the partisans who were approaching them, they rushed to meet them. Still, this time the peasants were not too well disposed. In the ravine, where 10 days ago whitewashed one-story houses now sadly blackened fire, the fascists had burned everything here. This heavy picture caused in the hearts of the partisans a sharp hatred for the pathetic servants of fascism who burned and devastated the villages in the partisan areas. Deep disgust for the entire fascist system felt every honest man when he saw with his own eyes how half-naked and barefoot children whose clothes and shoes were burned or taken away by the fascists, huddled together with the cattle in craters, hastily covered with wet straw, and together with the frozen and hungry children lay in the cold, hungry, wounded and sick partisans. The fires were not only in Trava. Fascist crimes were committed over a vast area, representing a new copy of the Turkish atrocities and former times in the Bulgarian villages of Perushtaitsa and Bata. In both Trava and Kaula, even the fruit trees were burned, and the houses were replaced by deep holes, half-destroyed cellars. With inimitable patience and steadfastness, the population of Trine and neighbouring districts bore the police terror, and with unquenchable, inexhaustible faith they fought for their bright and joyful tomorrow. I bow before you, people's patience, faith and struggle. The meeting with Georgy Avramov, Todor Mladenov and Svilen Veselinov took place in mid-March in the village of Raznik. After the party meeting we went to Viskia. We had to hold a party meeting there as well. In Raznik we did not raise the question of going to the detachment. This could have aroused suspicion on the part of the police that there was an organization in the village, and such suspicion would have led to a more thorough surveillance and search for the party cell. The tasks performed by comrades Stoyan Tenev and Boris Modrev were important. They required secrecy, so that the authorities would get the impression that everything was quiet and peaceful in the village. That is why in Raznik we did not destroy the cheese factory, did not touch the headman and did not set fire to the community. In Viskia, comrades Christopher Anakov, Isidor Atanasov and Tifil Jordanov were the most active. They were entrusted with organizing the meeting. They managed to gather 17 people in the tract of Rashenets, among whom were representatives of the villages of Mistitsa and Babets, from the former a girl Slavka Velinova, from the latter in Momchil Todorov. The main question put before this meeting was the formation of a fighting group which would have to cut the telephone connection east of Breznik on the evening when we planned to withdraw the new partisans from the villages of the western district of Breznik, Okolya, Yaroslavets, Bilintsev, Mertintsev, and Krasava. The purpose of this operation was to confuse the police so that they could not immediately send a detachment to the villages from which the new partisans were leaving. Georgy Avralov, Georgy Grigorov, Todor Emadenov, and Kirill Markov were in charge of leading the new partisans out. They were assisted by Vyaneta Jakova, Reiko Takov, Kristjo Pirivanov, Asen, Vircho, and the battle group was established. Christopher Anakov was instructed to keep the men on hand and, if the danger of arrest appeared, to gather them immediately and bring them to us. That was the end of the agenda, and we parted ways. I returned to Raznik to wait for a group of underground fighters who would come from Sofia, and Georgy Avralov, Todor Madanov and Svilen Veselinov went to meet with Kirill Markov and Georgy Grigorov to organize and carry out the reception and transfer of new partisans into the forest. Simultaneously with the transfer of new partisans, the comrades were to set fire to the community archive in the village of Krasava and punish 3 vicious enemies in the village of Bilinci. The operation was to take place on March 21, so the individual groups had to be in their places by the 20th. On the way to Breznik, Okolya, the group held a meeting in Milkyovsy and disarmed the headman in the village of Baba. Here the group was joined by Bai Timo, an old peasant who had spent his life working for the village rich. As the group climbed the hill east of Baba village, a thick fog descended and the whole neighbourhood was covered in darkness. The guide lost his way, and instead of Bilintsev took the group to the neighbouring village of Mertintsi. Our comrades had to run back, and they barely managed to hide at dawn at our Yatak Sedevsho Spasov's house. The group stayed here the whole day. Georgy Avramov and Todor Madenov managed to get in touch with their comrades from the villages of Krasava, Yaroslavtsi, Mertsi and Viskajar through the village boys and warned them to be ready. The groups intended for action, Krasava and Jaroslavki, went in the evening of March 20 to prepare everything on the spot, so that on March 21 in the evening at the agreed hour they could simultaneously start the action. Krivonosky Monastery was designated as the assembly point after the operation, from where everyone was to move together to Trinska Okolya. Each group had its own object, so the actions of the groups were different. The greatest difficulties were to be overcome by the group operating in the village of Bilinci. Here it was necessary to capture the headman of a police informer and to teach a Diversion in order to execute the death sentences passed on him long ago. In apprehending the headman there was a skirmish. As he was large, dense and strong, and Zlatan was small and weaker, the headman grabbed him and began to choke him. Zlatan called for help. But while Ivanka was running to him, he strained his strength and managed to hit him several times on the head with his pistol. The headman lost consciousness. At that time Ivanka ran up. Teacher Divderkin was also punished, and the police informer was not at home. The Krasava group made contact with Vlado Zakariev, a local activist, immediately after their arrival and obtained from him detailed information about the location of the community and the village guards protecting it. In the evening, the group travelled to the site, disarmed the guards with Vlado's help, and proceeded to destroy the archive in the community building. At the same time, 2 guys cut the phone line connecting the village to Breznik and the Viskia battle group to Sofia. A few minutes later, the archives were engulfed in flames. Tongues of fire soared to the sky. The police left Breznik, but by the time they reached the village, the partisans had gone far away. With them, proud and excited by the success of the operation, were 6 new partisans: Vlado Zakariev, Kostadin Nikolov, Arsen Alexov, Blagoy Simov, Ivan Evtimov, and Lupsho Ivan. The operation also ended successfully in Yaroslavtsi. Momchil and Kristio disarmed the village guards, summoned 9 new partisans, and set out for the assembly point. In the column, at a short distance from Momchil, were the Remzistki Stanka and Magda, and not far from them were the Bra. Stanka Ivan, Boris Antov, Marin, Stoiko, Stanimir, Dimitar, Sanko, and the oldest partisan in the village, Kristio Pivanov. He hurried after the enthusiastic young partisans and felt in 7th heaven with joy. His deepest wish was that the group would as soon as possible develop into the Vrezinsky detachment, which, like Trensky, would raise the population for a just struggle. Near the Krivonosky Monastery, it was becoming more and more lively and cheerful by the minute. One after another groups of partisans were arriving. People rushed to each other, gathered in groups. The newcomers were impatient and eager to start conversations with comrades from neighbouring villages, and the old men hurried to boast about who brought the most new partisans. Like a little child, Bai Pesho also rejoiced. He walked from one group to another, never tiring of admiring and rejoicing at everything that was happening, hugging Todor, Zlatan and Momchil, and "This is what our people are like. Do you see? Only in one night, 24 new partisans. Tomorrow the fascists will be mad with anger, but let them be mad anyway, their 18 carbines will remain in our hands. Isn't it wonderful?" Here he hugged and kissed Todor Madenov, who was in front of him. There was something to rejoice irresistibly at our hearty Bayu Pesho. This success largely depended on him as a party leader. Before setting off, Baipeso gathered all the new partisans, said a few warm and encouraging words to them, explained the rules of movement in the column, assigned the old partisans Zatan and Kristio to the front guard, and stayed in the middle of the column. Although he was tired from the long journey, he kept insisting that the detachment should go faster. It was necessary to overcome the steep slopes of the Bear and Stony Lubash as early as possible in order to reach the assembly point in the village of Iril by evening. Our movement rules required that there should be no talking during hikes and crossings. Everyone must remain silent and alert because the enemy could appear and open fire at any moment. Bai Pengju served as an example in this regard as well. Despite his usually gregarious nature, he was now walking in silence, and silence, like heightened vigilance, inevitably leads to a mental conversation with loved ones, friends. This time he seemed to break away from the column for a moment and was transported to his poor Sofia apartment, where his skinny, black-eyed Oreo and dark-haired Svetla remained, dreaming fairy tale dreams. They were the same as they had been a year ago when he had last seen them. Orglio is the same short, but energetic with hair as stiff as stubble, and his eyes are lively and intelligent. They look at his father and seem to chide him for his prolonged absence, and the swarthy Svetla, with dreamy eyes, who is already caught up with her mother in height, only smiles. And what if she, too, sees him now and in her dream is happy to meet him, and that they will never part again? "How are you there, my dear fledglings? Are you having a hard time without your father?" he whispered. "Hard, Daddy," sobbed Auglio. "Without you we are like without wings. On the street, children beat us, bully us about our fathers, and we don't dare tell them that we have a father too. You're not going anywhere now, are you?" A heavy lump rolled up to his throat, and he shook his head, ashamed of his own weakness. "Look at you," he chided himself. "How easily one can blossom. Just thinking, and tenderness turns into tears." Baptesio often thought of Auglio and Svetla. They were both his joy and his sadness. "If I remain alive," he said, "they will be my joy in life, but if I die, let them know that their father has honourably fulfilled his duty to the party and the people. This will oblige them to be honest citizens and to work as I did." When the column of recruits approached Eril, Georgi Nastev and Stilian Deshev, whom I had waited for in Rusnik, and I went to buy Vasil. Georgi Nastev was a medical student and Stilpian was a law student. I knew both of them. I had met Georgi about a year before, when I was also trying to enter the university, and Stilian in the cell of the police directorate, where we spent a few days in March 1942. Basil intrigued us greatly with his story about his neighbour Evga. Old Evga, a wealthy woman compared to the other peasants of the village, lived next door to Basil. Her house stood above all others in the Mahala. She constantly feuded with her grandfather Stanko and Vasil. Known for her stinginess, she never lent money to anyone, and if she had to give, she tried to pay back with more than enough, a well-to-do peasant. She supported the fascist government and more than once suffered Vasil to report to the police that he had hosted partisans at home and his house would be burned down. "I'll tell the gendarmes. You take partisans, dogs bark all night," she once said to him. "We'll see how you'll get away with it." "Get off me," snapped Vasil. "What partisans? Don't you know that I have a bitch in my yard and the male dogs are hanging around her all night long, and that's why she barks?" With this he did not convince old Evga, and she continued to intimidate him. One day Vasil was very frightened, and when we came he complained about her. There was no use in punishing her just for this nonsense, so we decided to send 3 partisans to visit her for a few days. The village was far from the town, and the police rarely appeared, so we instructed them to go out into the yard during the day with their guns, and Vasil was to look out of his house from time to time. This was to be the most solid argument against her. So we did, and presently Vasil was telling us, glowing with happiness, of old Yugi's magic transformation. 2 days before we came to Erul, he had gone out to fetch some water for himself. When the neighbour saw him, she grabbed her bucket and went straight to him. Before she could even put the bucket on the ground, she hurried to say hello. "Good morning, Vasilko," she sang. Instead of answering, he said defiantly to her, "Well, old one, and you have become your own man with the partisans? What are you important?" She did not make excuses, but only changed the tone of the conversation. "I'm not being important, I'm just telling you. The partisans come to me at night, while at yours they even walk around the yard during the day. I'll go to Trine today, and then we'll see how you'll get away with it." Grandma Evga got cold feet. Now she was between 2 fires. On one side were the partisans, on the other, the police. She was afraid of both, but she was more afraid of us. "There's no need, Vasil. God grant you many years of life. From now on, I've heard nothing and seen nothing, and I swear by my children I'll tell no one." "That's better. And I don't want you to say a word to me," said Vasil. He was very pleased with her, but we, to tell the truth, not so much. She almost starved the guerrillas to death. For 3 days she gave them neither eggs, nor meat, nor brinza, only pickles. And everyone knew that she was not poor. She had sheep and cows. We got angry and went to see her. "Why don't you respect the fighters for the people? Why do you feed them only pickles? Can they stand it if everyone feeds them like you do? Hey, there's nothing else, my sons. And that's what we eat." "Oh, you have nothing. And where are the 50 sheep, 2 cows? Where's the pig? Where are your chickens? Let's open the closet, let's see what you have and what you don't." Let's go into the closet, and what do we see there? A whole barrel of corned beef, another of cheese, a huge basket of eggs, and a big jug of butter. Is this called know-nothing? we asked. Well, here's the thing. We'll leave you your comrades for 3 more days, and if you don't feed them properly, we'll leave them for a whole month. The old woman tilted her head and answered nothing. This time, however, she not only fed them well, but gave them a pair of woolen knitted socks as a parting gift. This is how we involved in our movement the miser and trusted person of the authorities, old Ivga. From that day on, Vasil calmed down. We did not stay long in Erol. We went to Vidra, where we were to meet Slavko Radomirsky. However, we did not find him. He had already left with his group for Kalna. As soon as we arrived in Vidra, we received a report that the Breznik group had reached Erol, and that one of the young partisans had been fatally wounded by carelessness. We left Stilian in Vidra and, with our Dr. Nastev, immediately went back to Erol. The wounded man was lying in the koshara of Grandfather Gurgin, an old member of the party, who was not there at that moment. 2 partisans were sitting near the wounded man. They tried to help him, but it was too late. He died. The rest of the group, led by Bai Pesho, camped in the mahal of Smika near the village. Pesho's paradise did not yet know about the tragic end of the wounded partisan. We went to Smikar. The guards met us at the first house and immediately took us to Pesho's house, where Zlatan and Todor were. They had smiles on their faces, and it was the first time we had seen Bai Pesho so radiant. We decided not to disturb his joy, and did not say anything about the death of the guerrilla. We went around several doles with him. The fighters everywhere met us with enthusiasm and impatiently awaited the order to go on the road. Look, slave, look how many new men there are. Showed Bai Pesho with his right hand, holding my shoulder with his left. He was shining like a red sun, and could not be pleased. Everywhere we went songs were ringing, so much so that the glass in the windows rattled. The partisans also knew nothing about the death of their comrade in arms. In one of the houses, surrounded by girls and boys, sat Stanka and Magda from Yaroslavets. Stanka, the same girl who had found and saved my cloak during the shootout with the police at the cheese factory, was short, stocky, hardened by hard farm labour. She resembled her father, Bai Isai, not only in appearance but also in character. She did not talk much, but if she said a word, it was to the point. Her brother Ivan had the same character, and Zora and Liliana, the 2 younger sisters, were like their mother, more gentle. They preferred housework to field work. Magda was taller, browner and younger than Stanka, whom we met for the first time. For the Erol peasants, Stanka and Magda represented something new. They were the first peasant girls who had become partisans, so it was natural that interest in them was especially great. Women, old and young, and most of all girls, pelted. The girls thought that they must have fancies in the partisans, so they went themselves. They wanted it to be so, and to make it easier for themselves to go when some lad whispered a few cherished words to them at the sit-ins. What a disappointment. Magda and Stanka left just to fight. Now, could your mothers let you go? Didn't they feel sorry for you? Asked a girl standing next to a woman with a blonde baby in her arms. Why shouldn't they let us go? Replied Stanka. Have we gone the wrong way? Who will protect us but ourselves? I didn't ask anyone personally, Magda said a little arrogantly. When I told my mother about it, she said to me, your head is yours. Break it you want, keep it if you want. Do you young people think about your parents? You only make trouble for them. My God, what mothers? The women were surprised. We couldn't even leave our children for a day, but they... Why not? Bai Pesho entered the conversation. Children must learn to be independent. What would happen if such grown-up girls and boys asked their parents about everything and waited for their consent? There are probably few such fathers and mothers who said to their children, have a good trip. Be first in all your battles. Many, out of pity and parental selfishness, beg their children, saying that there are others who are born to do such things. And this is very harmful. Could we do such a huge work alone? No, we need thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands. The other women did not listen to the other arguments. They were horrified by the thought that any of their children without parental permission would go their own way. Maybe difficult, maybe terrible. So this little one, who now looks at his mother and cannot understand what worries her, will also have his own will, his own character. Eternal maternal illusions. The mother's overbearing character revolted. She lowered the dishevelled baby to the floor and angrily shouted at it. Get out of here. Why are you hanging on my arm? And I'll see the same help from you that the mothers of those who imitate men see. You are wrong, said Bipesho softly. When you get older, he will have his own children, his own worries. Then, why the hell am I watching him, if tomorrow he will turn his back to me? She said reproachfully, I did not mean that children should not take care of their parents. It is their duty, but along with this duty they have duties to their own children. Children should be educated from a young age to be industrious, self-reliant, respectful of adults. But at the same time, they should grow up to be implacable fighters against all slavery and oppression. We need people who most of all love their fatherland and people. That's how their mothers should raise them. Well, what will teachers do then, if only we educate children because it's their business? The woman stubbornly answered. That's what's wrong, that we trust only teachers to bring up children. Very few of today's teachers bring up children correctly. Education should be the primary responsibility of parents, not teachers. It should be important today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, at all times. Educate your child to be brave, proud, loving his parents, his fatherland, so that he becomes like these girls whose act, not approved by their parents, is sublime and patriotic. This deed will be highly appreciated by our nation. A person who sacrifices everything for others always stands above those around him. Now, if your child were their age right now and did what they did, that should be your greatest pride. Yeah, did their mothers raise them to find death under a bush somewhere? Why do they have to die? They didn't go to die, you ask them. They went to fight to defend their country. They didn't go to die, they went to live a life full of meaning. Don't think that these people you see here went to fight and seek death because they don't want to live. No, because they love life, they want to make it more beautiful, that's why. And those of us who remain alive will see this life, will rejoice in it, but will still continue to fight to make it even better. The woman thought for a moment. The foundations of her egoistic philosophy were shaken. Is what this serious man, who has both a wife and children, is saying true? Was it from love of life or hatred of it that he had taken this path? And if his path was so bad, would the others have followed him? And among the partisans there were not only guys, there were also grey-haired people. Do people at that age take a bad road? She thought once more about her child, about his future, believed by, paying and embarrassed. Reached out her hand, took the crying child, hugged him and said, Come to Mommy, son, and listen to what this uncle says. He wants you to grow up quickly and become a good boy. Do you hear? The child darted his eyes, looked at Bipesho, at the young partisan women who were sewing red stars on their hats. He looked at his mother and, having read something on her face that only he could understand, clung to her. There was silence in the room. Not far from Smarik's Mahana lived Grandfather Gurgin, a great friend of ours. After the incident with the wounded partisan, for whom he took paternal care, we felt indebted to him. We decided to visit him together with Bipesho and express our gratitude to him. Grandfather Gurgin met us at the door of the house. He scolded the angry spotted dog that had come upon us, drove it away and greeted us very coldly. Grandmother Steiner met us in the same way. She reluctantly gave her thin hand and quickly pulled it away and hid it under her apron. This puzzled us. Why did the old people suddenly become so cold to us? What had not we changed our minds in those few moments? But when we entered the lighted room, the people changed immediately. Welcome, welcome. Grandma Steiner hugged us motherly. I couldn't recognize you in the dark. My old eyes can't see very well. We apologized for disturbing them so late, and thanking the old people for the care with which they took care of the wounded partisan. We were about to go back. But Grandfather Gurgin did not think so. They had not yet had time to sit down, and he was already engaged in politics. When he began, will the swab break his neck so that no more people will die? Hey, that he will break his neck, Grandfather Gurgin. I am sure of that, but when, I can't tell you exactly. And he answered Bipesho. Now the Red Army is pursuing him on his heels, one after another liberating their villages, towns and republics. You say the swab is retreating, continued the old man. This pleases me very much. I have fought in several wars, and as far as I can see, the swab has had a hand in every one of them. He is greedy and envious. He looks at other people's goods like a wolf, and is never satisfied with his own. I think that for peace to come, the entire Swabian people must be wiped off the face of the earth. Only then will people live freely and peacefully. You can't do that, Grandpa Gurgin. It would be wrong to destroy the German people. German fascists are to blame for everything. who deceive their people, teach them against other nations and involve them in such dirty deeds as the war against the Soviet Union. Not the people, but the fascists who rule them must be exterminated. Grandfather Jurgen listened to our explanations, but it was felt that we did not convince him. He agreed with us out of a sense of love and hospitality, but deep down he still believed that the entire German people were to blame for this inhuman war and was convinced that they must be held responsible for it. We knew that Grandpa Jurgen was a kind man and was driven to extremes by the calamities of war, hunger and poverty, and lack of truthful speech. His views were a response to the misanthropic ideology of German fascism, shamelessly promoted in the press and on the radio. The end of slavery is near, Grandpa Jurgen. I intervened in the conversation. But it may be even closer. It depends on us, on the peoples who are fighting against this evil. In such a struggle, the help of every person is important. Your help is also needed. By giving a warm welcome to the partisans and supporting our movement, you are helping to defeat fascism as quickly as possible. And fascism is the power that is imposed on us, that strangles our freedom, that involves us in a war in which thousands of the best sons and daughters of our people die. The same power hangs over the head of the German people. It is the most ferocious, the most man-killing power that has deprived the Germans of even the simplest liberties. In Germany, millions of honest people were against the war, but the Nazis destroyed many of them. The war against the Soviet Union became possible only after the German fascists decapitated the labor movement, poisoned the souls of ordinary people with vile lies and promises. Many of those Germans who are now at the front expect that after the disaster over the Soviet Union they will become kings, tsars, governors, headmen and bosses, and the Soviet people will become powerless slaves. But not everyone in Germany is a fascist. There, like us, there are many honest people there who disapprove of the fascist regime, hate it and fight against it. This part of the German people is increasing more and more every day. By destroying the German people, we will also destroy the good people. Besides, most of those who are with Hitler today will be with Thälmann, the communist leader, tomorrow. Grandfather Jurgen listened with great attention. He understood politics, but not all the subtleties of this policy were clear to him. Put under our and by Pichot's double bombardment, he became convinced that we were telling him the truth, and he accepted this truth with all his soul. We will help, boys. We will help with all our strength. This is what the 60-year-old Grandfather Jurgen declares to you, and if I suffer, I will know that I suffered for Dimitrov's party. After this, our interlocutor reflected. He recalled the years when he was a minor, recalled Dimitrov's hot word. Then he lowered his head and, addressing the young people who had already crowded into the room. "Go, guys, love Dimitrov's party. With it you will defeat any enemy." We parted with Grandfather Jurgen and Grandmother Stana very satisfied with each other. That same evening the whole group left for the village of Goroshepsy. By midnight we were already in Popivdol, the mahal of Bai Nako, where we were quartered. Here also lived the headman, who served the two authorities, or rather served us, and Dragilov paid him. Bai Nako had just returned home. Our prolonged absence had seriously disturbed him, and he went from village to village, from yatak to yatak, looking for us. "Where are these people? Had something bad happened?" Bai Nako asked restlessly, neither alive nor dead from the anxiety born of the unknown. And now when he saw us, it was as if he had been reborn. "Where have you disappeared, brothers? Why didn't you say anything? If only we knew that you were alive," he reproached us. "It happened. Bai Nako. It was not possible," I explained to him. "Hey, I heard that you were in Vidrara, and I have been waiting for you ever since. I know you won't get around me. Are you not angry that I have brought so many people to you?" "I am satisfied now," replied Bai Nako, and called his wife. "Mertale, you catch the rooster, and let Olga and Mara make a fire and warm the water." "You haven't bathed for a long time, have you?" Bai Nako asked us. "Actually, a lot of people need a bath already. But can it be done quickly?" We'll do it, my dear," he assured us, and went to organize reconnaissance in the neighboring villages. The house of Bai Nako was in exemplary order. Not only his wife and two daughters kept it clean, but Bai Nako himself jealously followed the order. Everything in his house knew its place. Being a man of taste, a jack of all trades, he made everything himself, closets, beds, cabinets, and, to give him credit, he did it skillfully. It was enough for him to see how a thing was made once to reproduce it even better. He made it a rule that when guerrillas came to him, they had to bathe and change their clothes. And if they didn't have a change of clothes, Bai Nako would give them his and be happy. Sometimes we were so deeply touched by Bai Nako's concerns that we were ready to kiss him, if not for fear of appearing sentimental, and he would answer us, "If I and others like me will not take care of you, then who will? Not the fascists." With this, Bai Nako disarmed us. Having provided reconnaissance, he sat down with us and told us the local news. Ivanka's health had deteriorated during the trek. She was badly exhausted, and now besides her heart, which was causing her much trouble, the temporarily subsided ulcer had given voice, and our medicine was quite helpless. Before Georgi Nastiv's arrival, we had had little recourse to medical help. We tried not to get sick, and if someone got sick, we treated them as best we could. Some with medicines from the elementary first aid kit entrusted to Bai Zakari, some with folk remedies, and strangely many wounds and frostbite, which in normal conditions take at least a month to treat, were cured faster. Now Ivanka had to be treated for real, but we could not leave her with Bai Nako. Before the last campaign she had lived with him for about 2 weeks, and it happened that she had to be carried on a blanket in the middle of the night to her grandmother Milanka in the village of Vidra. Some of the neighbours started a rumour, and people in the villages began to say that a wounded partisan was lying at Nako Stoimanov's house. For these reasons we decided to take Ivanka to her grandmother Milanka again and to leave Nastiv with her. Nastiv's presence, although he had no medical education, gave us more confidence. While the others rested, we took Ivanka. Vidra is not far, only a few kilometres away, but we had a lot of trouble carrying her across the ravines. When old Milanka saw us, she could not hold back her tears. In the poor state of Ivanka's health, she almost considered herself guilty. Why did I let her go? After all, I saw that not only in the battle on the road she cannot. But she wouldn't listen. "I'll go and go. I didn't come to lie in bed, but to fight." Grandma Milanka hugged Ivanka even more tightly, kissed her and covered her with several new multicoloured blankets. Party and observant, Grandma Milanka immediately noticed that we were worried about Ivanka, and after walking us to the gate, she said, "Hey, Slava, as long as Ivanka is in my hands, be calm. I myself will die, but I will not give her to anyone." And indeed, thanks to the care of Grandmother Milanka and Georgi Nastiv, Ivanka recovered, got stronger, and in a few weeks returned to the detachment. On the way back, we took Stilian with us, and by dawn we returned to the house of Bai Nako. Here we waited for another group of underground fighters, which included Radenko Vidinsky, Slavcho Venjev, and Zinovy Aptonov. After gathering, we all went to Upper Melna, where Georgy Avramov, Radenko Vidinsky, and I separated from the group, and the rest of us, under the command of Zatan, went to Ivan Mufi, the Mahana of Lower Milva. Immediately upon arrival, Zlatan organised guards and reconnaissance. The most suitable for this purpose were the local children who went to school. Before the boys moved, Zlatan gathered them in one room and clearly explained what to scout, how to signal in case of danger. He warned them not to say a word about it to anyone. Stoyan Kostov, a 13-year-old boy who was Ivanka's buddy, was put in charge of the group. Because he had saved Ivanka from arrest, Zlatan trusted him the most. On the way to school, the kids stopped repeatedly. This was done on the command of Stojan, who organised something like a rehearsal. Each schoolboy acted once for the policeman and once for himself. The rehearsal was carried out in a certain sequence. The one playing the role of the policeman would stop on the road, serious and frowning, and in a stern voice ask some, "Hey you, are there any partisans in the Mahol?" "No," he would answer him. "Aren't you lying?" was the second question of the police. "Let my mother die if I lie," who swore the schoolboy and passed. Then the policeman believed and did not ask again. The rehearsals were very useful. At the very school, the headman stopped the children. He looked at them sternly and questioningly, and "No. Do you have any partisans?" "No," replied Stoyan without hesitation. "You're lying," said the headman with false confidence. "If I'm lying, let my mother die." Stoyan crossed himself. The others stared and could hardly contain their laughter, but Stoyan turned his head and spat over his shoulder so as not to bring trouble on himself by swearing falsely. The headman did not notice the deception, believed it, and went away, and the children laughed long afterward at the cunning of their leader. This cunning kept the partisans out of trouble. In the evenings, Leighton thanked Stojan for his cleverness and went with the group to the village of Kolunica. After the arrival of Radenko Vidinsky, a representative of the Central Committee of the party, an old communist, a deputy of the National Assembly, and one of the oldest members of the Central Committee of the BKP, the plan that Bar Pizzo and I had drawn up underwent a number of changes. Instead of going to the vicinity of Radomir, we escorted Comrade Vidinsky to the Trekhojan district, where he was temporarily remaining as a Central Committee commissioner. This district included about 30 villages. Pesho and I were not familiar with these villages either, so it was only to our advantage to meet the people here. From Pauplula we went to Goroshepsi, and from there to Dokyovsi. In these villages we held party meetings and familiarized the communists with the new course of the party. The cordiality with which we were greeted by the population and their great love for the partisans made a strong impression on comrades Radenko, Vidinsky and Georgy Avramov. They had not seen how it was at the beginning, when the detachment was assisted by only 3 yataks, when the population was afraid of us and gave us away to the police. They did not know how hard it was for us at that time to survive the winter, to create the first mass bases. Maybe that was why, or maybe in order to encourage the first partisans. The 2 experienced communists considered the rapid growth of consciousness among the peasants and the great successes in mass political work as our personal merit. Imperceptibly, we passed kilometre after kilometre. Long Luka was far behind us, and now the Kosovar dogs were barking at us. Who of us knows the way? Georgy Avramov asked. Go, Radenko answered him. Kosovo is my kingdom. Slavcho is the Tsar in Traian region, and here I am. I know every path and every house. If that's so, lead the way, exclaimed Pesho. A few minutes later, Comrade Vidinsky knocked on some gates. A dark-haired young man in a shirt showed up. He recognized Vidinsky at once and rushed to embrace him. Pesho and I stood by the fence of the village well and enjoyed the beautiful night landscape illuminated by the moon. During our 2-day stay in Kosovo, we had the opportunity to meet local comrades and organize a diversion that facilitated the detachment's passage through the Sredorik area and which I have already mentioned. Having learned that the detachment had set fire to the community in the village of Zlogosh, from which Kosovo was 1 day's journey away, and that many troops and police were moving in the direction of Sredorik, Dragojinci in the footsteps of Dencho, we decided to attack the local village guards and create the impression that the detachment had not passed through Sredorik, but through Kosovo. We had information that the day before, the police in the village of Treklojano had summoned Raid, an active member of the Skogorist party, from Kosovo and assigned him the task of organizing a public guard in the village. At the appearance of the partisans, one of the fascists was to give a signal by which all members of the public guard would gather in one place where they would receive weapons and a task. We had instructed the Remsists in advance to study all the details pertaining to the village guards. Composition, armament, guardhouse, signalling, and no sooner had it gotten dark than we learned that there were no police in the village, that the permanent guard consisted of 10 men, that they were unarmed, that the guardhouse was in the school. We also learned that when the guerrillas appeared, the signal for the gathering of the guards would be the striking of the church bell, by which all the fascists of the village would gather at the school, and there a trusted man of the authorities would distribute weapons to them to kill the partisans. Both buildings, the school and the church, stood side by side on one side of the highway Dolgaya Luka, Trekliano, parallel to which flowed a shallow rivulet. When everything was ready, Pesho and I appeared at the entrance to the school. The automatic rifles gleamed in the light of the flickering lamp, and the peasants who served as guards shuddered with fear. They began to hide one behind the other, as if each wanted us not to see his face, or to be the first to meet a machine gun burst if we opened fire. Only we ordered them to raise their hands and start searching, as Radenko Vidinsky's voice was heard from the row. The first couple with 3 machine guns to cross the river to block the road from Penkiopsi, the second to ambush under the village, and the third to arrest the headman and all the other fascists here. His voice was clearly heard in the schoolroom. This confused the peasants even more. They cried, begged to be let alive, and promised that they would never again serve in the village guard. The same promise was made by the head of the guard himself, raid when we went to his house. However, we were not satisfied with promises, but suggested that he immediately go to the police station in Treccliano and resign. After that, we handed Order Number 13 to the headman, the old Sankavist Andon, and other adherents of the government. We then relieved the village guards and marched to the neighbouring village of Penkiovci, where we attacked the post station. Both our operations completely intimidated the fascists. They had to divide their forces, and that was our goal. So the detachment left Kosovo without a fight and without any losses. As a resignation of the chief of the village guard, raid had a strong effect on the peasants. The bailiff of the Trecclian police station, he said, "Mr. Bailiff, relieve me of my duties as commander." "Why?" the bailiff asked, goggling his eyes. I received Order Number 13 from the partisans," replied Raid. "Oh, so what of it? Whose orders are you following, ours or those bandits?" "Mr. Bailiff," pleaded Rede in despair, "I cannot refuse to carry out this order. I was pardoned yesterday because I promised to resign, and if I deceive them, no mercy will be shown me." "Coward," roared the bailiff. "I'll put you on trial. You sold out to the partisans. Get out of here quickly, so that my eyes never see you again, you corrupt bitch." "Wait, Mr. Bailiff, I haven't sold myself, and I haven't sold anyone else. I only want my family to suffer. Put someone else on the job," Raid said excitedly. "Another." The bailiff shook his head. "And the others are just like you. All right, get out of here." Raid puffed on his sheepskin cap without even saying goodbye, quickly crossed the threshold of the station, and went home, contentedly. In the centre of the square in Penkiovci was a large one-story building. Judging by its appearance, it must have belonged to either the pop or the headman. We didn't care, so we decided to knock. There we could probably find, if not a rifle, at least a pistol. We approached the house. The window overlooking the square was covered with blankets, and only a thin, ribbon-like ray of light shone through from under the door. Having looked carefully, by Raidenko said, "They are not asleep yet. You go in, and I will stay to guard." A short woman appeared at the door. She met us a little worried, but, realizing that we are partisans, gathered courage and whispered in my ear. "Guys, my priest is a terrible womanizer, always hitting on the village women, and I am constantly tormented. It would be good to frighten him. He has a gun, come in," the priestess added loudly and led us through a long corridor. From the way the Priadi spoke and held herself, it was evident that, although she belonged to the rural intelligentsia by social status, she was neither cultured enough nor too simple. A half and half, but in this situation she was clever and cunning enough to use the circumstances to her advantage. But did we have the right to interfere in their private lives, and which of them was more guilty, him or her? "As for the pistol, we'll take it," said Bai Pesho, "but let the priest and the priestess decide the rest of their business." When the door of the room was opened, where the priest lay sprawled on the ball bed, the prioress called to him, "Father, these people have come to confess us. Let him who is a sinner be afraid now." "Church servants have no sins," the priest replied half jokingly, half seriously, and in spite of the fact that armed men had entered the room, he did not rise and did not even move. And when we greeted him, he remained in the same position as if he had been put in a plaster cast. There were various occasions in our practice when we visited rich people, entered the houses of priests at any time of the day or night. Even our worst enemies got up as required by the laws of hospitality, but this one lay on the bed like a log. One day we happened to visit the Ranulja priest, Milan. His house was two-storied, and it was evident that his bedroom was on the second floor. We knocked on the door of the lower floor, drummed as hard as we could, but no one answered. Suddenly we heard that someone was treading lightly on the stairs and was silent. We waited, thinking that the door would open, but it didn't. In general, we were out of patience, and then we shouted, so much so that the whole neighbourhood could hear. "Open up, Father, or we'll tear down your gate. You can't hide your sinful soul from us." Not a minute later, a trembling man's voice answered, "My children, the Lord will not allow you to reveal. Hasten to grieve his noble soul." All right. Let us wait a few more seconds for God's favour, but if then you do not open, and we will have to enter the house through the broken doors." Before we could finish, the doors were already open, and the priest Milan stood before us, frozen in God's humility, and gave each of us a hand. A little while later the same hand threw over our shoulders a pair of knitted socks. And this Penkiov priest is as silent as a mute. We ask about weapons, are silent. We ask about fascists in the village, no attention. And not only silent, he doesn't even move. What a jackass, whispered Pino to me. He stubbornly won't budge. Even the priestess was indignant at his unscrupulous behaviour. Father, get out of bed. People will think you've just given birth, she mocked her husband. You do not give birth, so I will give birth. He snidely replied. I told you that I feel bad. It was clear from their conversation that the relationship between the spouses was not the best, and a scandal was brewing in the house. Father, Pesho said to him, I beg you to give me the gun, if you want it for a day, or if you want to give it to me as a present. Hey, did the priestess tell you about the pistol? The priest asked. She did, I know. That's all right. When you go, I'll ask her what king she serves. Listen. Peso turned to the priest seriously. The priestess hasn't told us anything, but if we find out that you're going to abuse her, then, we'll find something for you. Tell me nicely, will you give me the gun or not? I gave it to the mayor. It was rusty, wouldn't fire, so I gave it to him. You wouldn't have had any use for it anyway. The headman lived somewhere at the other end of the village, about 7 or 8 kilometres away from our intended path. If we were sure that we would really find the gun there, it would not be a pity to go there, but it was very likely that the priest had not told us the truth. It was better to go to Palilula and wait there for Densho. We did not wait for Densho, but Georgy Grigorov, Zlatan, Dimitar Tashev, and 3 or 4 others came. Several death sentences were to be carried out, the tavern keeper Tetsapo in Vidra and the priest in Goroshevsky. He, taking advantage of the position of God's chance, not only collected food from the peasants, but also informed the fascists about those who helped the partisans. Although he was given our order number 13, it was of little use. Here, in Palilula, Pesho and I parted with Radenko of India. He returned to his district, and the group and I went to Goroshevsk. We reached the village before dawn and settled down in the church Mahala. The time for lunch was approaching. We with Pesho were awake, and Georgy Grigorov slept, as we rested in shifts. It was already time for our scouts, who had been sent to the villages of Vidra, Vukan, and Levarika, to return. Suddenly Rilke, the owner's daughter, who had been entrusted with watching the street, cried out alarming, Oh, here come the priest and the psalmist. We jumped up and went to the window. The girl was not deceived. The priest and the psalmist were already walking through the yard. One was carrying a white kettle, and the other a large basket for eggs. So much for the priest, so much for the trouble, joked Pesho. Why does he always stick his nose where it doesn't belong? Lazarus Day, answered the girl's mother, and went to give the priest a gift before he entered the house. The priest took the eggs, blessed her, and came back. Just by evening he will fill the basket and provide us with eggs for dinner. I said to Pesho, and he suddenly laughed so loudly that he woke up Georgy. Why are you laughing? He mumbled in his sleep. Slavcho made me laugh, replied Pesho, and tucked the blanket behind his back. Georgy fell asleep again, and we began to read the newspapers. It got dark, and the groups went on their missions. One, led by Kaiman, went to the priest. Where is the priest? Kemen asked the priest when he entered the house. He hasn't slept at home since he received the note with the bad number. He goes somewhere, but I don't know where. And the priestess lit a kerosene lamp and put it on the window facing the neighbouring house, but it made no impression on us. In the meantime, the priest, recognizing by signal the danger, ran away and hid himself. In the evening, when the band was fully assembled, the incident was reported and Pesho. This time he ran away, but he will fall into our hands some day. And the eggs collected by the priest we did eat. The priest had to give them to us with the basket. The group sent to the village of Vidra returned, having accomplished the task perfectly. The Korchmar Pano had been eliminated. The last straw that overflowed the cup of our patience was his report to the police that the squad was in Vidra. The police immediately organized an ambush, but thanks to the vigilance of our scouts we managed to slip away. For this treachery, the tavern keeper received the punishment he deserved. Circular No. 2 provided for the departure to the partisans of almost all responsible workers, both on the party and RMS lines. Some committees left completely. Only those comrades whose presence, in the opinion of the higher leadership, was extremely necessary remained in the field. In Sofia district, mobilization took place under the direct leadership of the Druzhny Committee of the party, through established channels. The secretary of the RM's Central Committee and a member of the party Central Committee, Iodanka Nikolova, the secretary of the District Committee, Georgy Chapkov, the secretary of the NEN-Os and a member of the Central Committee, Nacho Ivanov. The members of the RM's Central Committee, Spylan Rusev, Dobry Alexiev and Ninko Stefanov, were transferred from Sofia to the Trinsky detachment. Some of them gathered at Batanovsky Station, some at Radomir, and the rest at Zeman Station. Unimpeded transportation of people to the mountains was facilitated by the mass evacuation of the inhabitants of Sofia. The entire population was leaving the capital, so that neither the luggage nor the travelling appearance of the underground fighters aroused any suspicion on the part of the police. At that time, everyone was dressed alike, everyone had backpacks, large bags or not. In order to strengthen the military leadership of the Sofia zone, the following changes were made. Boyan Bulgaranov was appointed commander of the zone. Dobry Durov was appointed commander of the Shavdar detachment. Zilo Demirevsky was appointed commander of the Dupnitsa detachment. Delcho Simov and I were appointed members of the zone headquarters. Zedravko Georgiev remained the chief of staff of the zone. At the same time, Georgy Avramov and I were inducted into the district party committee. By April 8, many people had gathered in Kalna. By that time, Svetozar Vukmanovic, a representative of the Central Committee of the CPG and the General Staff of the People's Liberation Army operating in Kosovo, Metohija and Macedonia, had arrived. Between him, on the one hand, and the responsible comrades who had arrived from Sofia, Vlado Tritkov, Boyan Bulgaranov, Jordan Nikolova, Georgy Chankov, and the command of the detachment, on the other hand, negotiations were held concerning the operational and tactical interaction between our and Yugoslav People's Liberation Army troops operating near the Bulgarian-Yugoslav border south of Mount Rui. During these negotiations, a plan was approved, according to which the Trina detachment, which was at that time in Kalna, was to immediately move to the mountainous region of Kozjaka, passing through Kyustendil to the towns of Vranja, Kumanovo, Kratovo, located on Macedonian territory, and together with Macedonian and Serbian partisans to destroy the occupation troops there and to raise the population to a mass armed struggle. The fulfillment of this task entailed new, even greater difficulties and trials. According to the plan, the detachment had to move more than 100 kilometers away from the Trine district, and its actions had to take place in a completely unfamiliar territory. But the personnel of the detachment did not lose heart. The point is not where the enemy would be defeated, on Serbian, Macedonian, or Bulgarian soil. It is important that the goal was achieved. The arrival of the secretary of the district party committee, the secretaries of the Central Committee and the district committees of the RIMs, as well as other leaders, had the positive side that along with the help provided to us on the spot, they themselves had the opportunity to become directly acquainted with the work being done here and with the people. 2 conferences with those responsible for party and youth work in the districts of the county, as well as meetings with the rank and file members of the party and RMC, played a huge role for our future activities. The tasks that the county committee assigned to the PAS were aimed at the rapid defeat of fascism and were summarized as expand the network and increase the number of party and youth organizations and fighting groups. In the near future, to put an end to the underestimation of the role and importance of the Fatherland Front committees as organs of future people's democratic power, and to boldly attract members of other parties to their side, if they are honest and have a positive attitude to our struggle. To deploy the partisan movement with all our strength. There is no more important task for a communist at this stage than to fight against fascism with arms in hand. Every member of the party and the RMS is obliged to bring at least one non-party patriot into the unit. The involvement of the broad masses in the partisan movement must soon lead to the creation of large partisan units and their mastery of the entire territory, to strengthen and accelerate the work on the decomposition of the army. For this purpose, use the relatives and friends of soldiers. Their friends distribute leaflets among the soldiers, and when confronted, If the soldiers do not surrender, give them to feel the power of our weapons. Work in the army to bring to what level, so that whole units and parts would go to us. Erect German and government objects. Warehouses, railroad lines and junctions, garrisons. To create such a situation that the fascists dare not dare to breathe. To break down the administration to such an extent that the population feels that the fascist authorities are powerless to do anything against the partisans. During our stay in Bokov, we ran into a provocateur. Who would have guessed that Boris Mitov, my former classmate with whom we grew up together, had become a traitor? It is difficult to recognize a strictly clandestine enemy just by his clothes or comfort. Depending on the situation, he can present himself as a patriot to the bone, a fighter for the freedom of the people, or a poor man. Boris seemed to us a man sympathetic to our struggle, admiring our successes, ready to help us in any way he could, even to set up a printing house if we needed one. In the days when the ground was burning under the feet of the fascists, when the Red Army was approaching us faster and faster, and especially after the fascists' attempts to massacre the partisans had failed completely, Boris Mitov was recruited by the gendarmerie. With his help it was intended to capture, or in extreme cases liquidate the leaders of the detachment. To fulfill this purpose, he had to win our confidence from the very beginning, seduce us with the fact that he could deliver to us a printing press, shoes, watches, and other necessary items, and then prepare our arrest. And Boris began to prepare his black deed. Through the Yetaks he obtained our consent to a meeting. As the first meeting he was especially generous in promises, saying that he loved us like brothers, that he would get everything we needed, and insisted on more frequent meetings. I knew that Boris worked in the bookbinding shop of our countryman Weiden Tuves, and Weiden was a man known for his advanced views. When I was an apprentice, he had often supplied me with paper, and one could believe that he would deliver to us the printing press which the workshop had, especially as Boris was a companion of the owner. At this meeting, Mitov showed himself to be a great enthusiast for our cause. We agreed that he would send the paper and some other things to his father in Behova, and he also insisted on a second meeting so that he could personally give us part of what he had promised. We agreed to meet next time on May 1 at the same time and place. Several days passed, and on the night of May 1 the gendarmerie silently surrounded the village and occupied all the paths leading to it. Bokova was gripped by anxiety. Again someone's mother would cry, again someone's house would catch at the moment when everyone was waiting in terror to see who would be visited by the trouble. Boris was walking smugly around one of the offices of the gendarmerie in Sofia and waiting impatiently for the results. Thus in anticipation passed the whole day. The telephones between Trine and Sofia were working continuously. Even the text message that we had been captured or killed was ready, but the trap was empty. Preoccupied with forming new combat units, we completely forgot about the meeting and accidentally avoided an impending ambush. The gendarmerie was left with nothing, but Boris Mitov, its employee, fell into even greater dependence on it. He did his best to uncover the underground organization in Sofia. He managed to get to our Yetaks Milan Atapasov, Haralambir Zakhariev, Ivan Mikhailov and others. They were arrested one by one. It was not easy for our comrades, they survived, but they came out of prison crippled. The concentration of new partisan forces in Kalny was not a secret to the enemy, who began to prepare forces to strike a decisive blow to the guerrilla movement in our area. The forces that the enemy began to concentrate against us as early as mid-April numbered almost 40,000 men. These were the 14th and 29th Infantry Divisions, the 1st and 2nd Cavalry Regiments, the ANA 23rd and a 52 1st, through Faith 2 1st to 53rd, and 1st Infantry Regiments, the Jaeger, Gendarme and Assault Battalions, the 453rd Squadron of Reconnaissance Aircraft and a group of bombers, a number of other parts and units. All these forces were subordinated to the commander of the 5th Separate Army, General Boydiev, whose headquarters were located in the town of Vranyar. The headquarters of the 14th Infantry Division was in Strezimirovtsi, 5 or 6 kilometers from Kalna. Here were also the main forces of the division, as well as the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Before the offensive and the encirclement of our and Yugoslavian units, the Fascist command, as early as April 12, made a reconnaissance attack on Kalna, which had very sad consequences for the Gendarme Lieutenant Colonel Stoichev. Counting on information received from random persons, according to which there were no partisan forces in the village, Stoichev stormed the village from three sides and gave his gendarmes complete freedom to kill and plunder. In their greed, they lost all caution, and ours were just waiting for that. They came down on them from the thickets and opened a hurricane fire with rifles and automatic rifles. Partisans of the 5th South Moravian Brigade arrived to help our group in Kalna. This caused such panic among the gendarmes that they lost all self-control and rushed in different directions, trying only to save their own skin. After a short battle, 15 bodies of gendarmes were left on the field. Among the 9 wounded was also the commander of the police group Miladinov. Lieutenant Colonel Stoichev himself was saved by some miracle. He returned to the city, overcome by a snake-like anger toward the partisans, feeling thirsty for blood, and he could easily quench it because several people were languishing in the walls, among whom were one of our partisans, Duko Rangelov from Miloslavtsev, Stoyan from Kalna, and others. On them the defeated Stoichev vented his anger. Stoichev's headquarters was in the building of the gymnasium. On the table in front of the lieutenant colonel, next to the metal eagle stretched out over the inkstand, was a small notebook with the following printed on the letterhead: Commander of the 1st Military Police Battalion. The lieutenant colonel sat behind the desk with a grim look. The successes of the partisans and the impossibility of dealing with them embittered him more and more. His ingenuity of cruelty had no bounds. His head was working hard. By what means to suppress the struggle of the people? Whether it applied to one person, to a few, to the whole village, it did not matter to him. The main thing was not a moment of inaction. Just now he bent over the table, thought for a moment, and wrote quickly. Mr. Baikushev, bring the partisan to me immediately for interrogation. Then he pressed the bell button. A young gendarme stood in the doorway. Call to me at once the man whose brother was killed yesterday. Yes, Mr. Lieutenant Colonel. Yermenkov bellowed and slammed the massive door behind him. Yermenkov was his bodyguard. Not 5 minutes later, a gendarme appeared in Stoichev's office, moved to tears by the lieutenant colonel. Would you forgive them the death of your brother, who had fought heroically against the bandits? Stoichev said sympathetically. If you don't avenge him, your parents and friends will ask you. They will consider you a coward, so you have an opportunity to avenge your brother tonight. He tore a scribbled piece of paper from his notebook and handed it to the gendarme. Here, give this letter. It says to whom. Pick one soldier you trust the most and shoot her. That will be your feat. God be with you. Go. Stoichev said, stroked the young man's head and adjusted the mourning ribbon on his sleeve. When attempting to escape, he added, Yes, Mr. Lieutenant Colonel, your order will be executed, was the obedient reply. It's not only an order. I think it is your wish as well. You must take revenge. As for me, young man, I feel like shooting all 6 of them this very night. We will, and we will avenge our losses of yesterday. And we'll leave no stone unturned from the village where so many of your comrades died. Lieutenant Colonel Stoichev will long be remembered by the people of Kalniki. Go, avenger, after the partisan. The soldier went out and thought, how is it so, to kill a bound man and a woman? If there was at least a man, or he would start crying, sobbing, he couldn't stand it, he would roll over her and let her go. And the commander's order. What will happen to him if he doesn't fulfill that order? That beast will shoot him. No, it's better to follow orders whether it's a man or a woman. Anyway, the lieutenant colonel is responsible and he, performer. The soldier walked along the wide corridor of the gymnasium and thought, is it the guerrilla's fault that yesterday's battle killed his brother? After all, she had already been in a cell for 5 months. Still, an order is an order. We must obey it. The young gendarme decided to himself. In the barracks, the soldier called Crumb took him under his arm, took him into the corridor and initiated into the mystery. Then the 2 of them went to the Okali office, where the guerrilla was in custody. The policeman on duty led the girl out of the dark cellar. She was rather tall, with thick brown hair, and her large eyes, over which her eyebrows converged, gave her face a natural austerity. The smile that had been on her face before had disappeared. The appearance of the soldiers puzzled her greatly, but the thought that they could be much more easily negotiated with than the police agents reassured her. She walked between them, keeping an eye on the one with the mourning ribbon. He was stern and important, and did not speak to her until they reached the bridge over the Irmu River, which was about 20 paces from Stoichev's headquarters. Until then she had only spoken to the other fellow, who was sympathetic to her in that he treated her without malice. He had spoken with subtle irony about the unsuccessful action of the gendarmerie yesterday, and had only become serious when he told her of the misfortune that had befallen his friend. "What can you do, boys? There's fighting, people die on both our side and yours. So am I. I do not know my fate as long as I am in the hands of these villains who force us to raise arms against the people. Who are you fighting for? I would ask this boy, what did his brother die for?" For the truth? For the Tsar?" replied the Avenger sharply. "It is not true that for the truth. You're not asking for the truth. You protect the rich, protect their banks, their property. You die for those who take away your bread, butter, meat, and other products. Who, except the partisans, prevents the authorities from taking everything the peasants have, including your parents? And you went against those defending your own interests, shooting your own brothers. Shut up, you bastard, the soldier with the black armband. What kind of brothers are you to me, who killed my brother? I'll avenge him. I'll shoot you this very night. I says, I don't doubt that you can kill me. You're capable of it. But when I joined the squad, I made up my mind about my life. It's very precious to me, but I can sacrifice it for the happiness of generations. Now, obviously, I'm in your hands. It won't cost you anything to shoot me, but you won't gain anything personally. In fact, you'll lose. And you'll lose the most precious thing of all, the love of your parents. You'll be hated by the whole nation. You're still young. Think before you do such a despicable thing. Think. I don't have to think. I have orders. Whoa, these orders. Hey, the lieutenant colonel's. You don't have to follow his orders, and no one will blame you for it. On the contrary, if you do, you'll be committing a crime before your people, and at a time when even women and children are rising up to fight the fascists. You serve them, not your people. The partisans' words were strong and passionate. They, like arrows, pierced the hearts of the soldiers, and the girl felt how gradually disarmed her opponents. One had already gone completely to her side, and the other was justified by the commander's order. Crum had long tried to warn her to stay close to him, and by no means move aside, but he feared that his partner might denounce him. Afterwards, partly with words, partly with facial expressions, he managed to carry out his decision. The appreciative look and the trust established between them was a fitting reward for Crum. Everything he had heard that evening was new to him, and that was why her words had fallen on the fertile soil prepared by the remsists of his native village. So the fact that he had been mobilized into this military police unit did not at all oblige him to be like his buddy, so Crum decided to side with the guerrilla without thinking of how it might turn out for himself. In attempting to escape, he repeated in his mind the order of his superior. Is there any greater meanness in the world than to attribute to people a non-existent species and then kill them? Reasoned the soldier and hated himself that he, along with others, would bear the ignominious stigma of a murderer. Such disgust was rising in his chest, both for himself and for his comrade, this obedient dog, that he wanted to shoot him and run away together with the partisan. But he did not have the strength for that, or perhaps he did not have enough hatred. Sinking, he did not notice how they passed the stone staircase and stopped at the door of the lieutenant colonel's office. Here, left to himself, he felt how weak he still was and changed his mind. Hey, damn him, isn't it a shame to be so cowardly and soulless? The young man asked himself. No, I'm not like that, I'll save her. I'll save her under any circumstances. Even if I die, he decided after some hesitation. The partisan was not long in the interrogation. Stoichev asked her the same questions as before. It was not about the interrogation, but about the trap that this former Sarmakov merchant was preparing for her. That was why he was so exquisitely polite this time. And this politeness against the rudeness and cruelty of the previous interrogations was like a new patch on an old garment. Well, you are free now, young lady, said the lieutenant colonel affectionately, and think. There is no use in hiding the people who have brought you to this position. Besides, you must also think of your parents, who are now in great agony. I do not think about anything and cannot think of anything. Confidently answered the partisan and left the office. A young soldier with a mourning ribbon was waiting for her at the door. The truth that the young partisan spoke about did not get out of her head, made her think about life displacing the sprouts of anger and revenge sown Stoichev. This was helped in the meeting with the officer on duty at the entrance, and the friendly sympathy with which he sent the girl. The soldier thought, what connects them? Perhaps acquaintances, perhaps like-minded. It is difficult to sort out human relations, to grasp all the connections in these confusing times. And who can say which side the truth is on? Isn't it better to step aside from this dirty business altogether? If it is necessary to shoot, let the lieutenant colonel do it himself, and there is nothing to do but smile hypocritically and lusciously. There is already so much blood on his hands without it. Now, walking 2 steps behind the partisan, the soldier felt some trepidation, some new attitude to the partisan, and conspiratory winked at his comrade. The next morning, Stoyshev impatiently awaited news of the fulfillment of the order, but no one told him anything. He was worried not only because of the fact that the partisan could stay alive. To kill her was always in his power. He was worried about something else, the impact of the situation on the soldiers, whether he would be able to rely on them tomorrow. That was what made him nervous and angry. At lunchtime, some noise was heard from the lieutenant colonel's office. Someone was being whipped with something, whether with a stack or something else. No one could understand. But between the groans, one could clearly hear the voice of the chief. "Why didn't you fulfill the order? Why? Answer me." Half an hour later, a soldier with a morning bandage staggered out of the office. But this time he did not look like himself. After the gendarme's operation in Kalnay, a 35-year-old peasant from the village of Preslon, between Strezimirovsky and Kalia, came to us. He had just been released from imprisonment. He had gone through all the trials and horrors of police custody, and in the end, in order to free himself from unbearable abuse, he was forced to accept whatever was offered to him. He agreed even to the most heinous crime, to poison the command of the train detachment. "I shall get out of here," he thought, "and only my heels will they see." The poison was in 2 sachets, one for Dencho and one for me. The plan was well conceived. The peasant was to come to the detachment, introduce himself as a cook, and when we entrusted him with such a responsible job as cooking a beggar, to fulfill his terrible plan. After this, he was to take refuge in a place designated by the police. I had been thinking for a long time, the peasant recounted. But what would I gain by doing this? Only the hatred of the people. The fascists alone would gain, since the struggle is against them. That's why I decided to come to you and tell you everything. I feel much better now. I think I did what honest people do. And he stayed with us, but not as a cook, but as a partisan fighter. The creation of a new partisan brigade was the most important event of early May. The detachment, which included the replenished battalions named after Hristo Botev and Basil Levski, was ready to turn into a brigade, and from the new fighters who joined our ranks in April and May, it was planned to form another partisan unit. At first, we thought to distribute the former partisans and newcomers equally in both brigades, but since the detachment returned late from the campaign to the south, and the enemy was preparing a new offensive against us, we had to hurry with the formation of a new brigade, in which we included all the recently joined us partisans. The brigade was formed in the village of Kalna. I, accustomed to smaller units such as a Shita, battalion and detachment, was not entirely clear how to command a brigade of several hundred fighters, but it wasn't even that scared me. Worrying was the fact that the predominant part of the guerrillas, guys and girls who first took up arms, they still had to be trained, and there was no time for this, as well as no opportunity to get to know them all better. It was also worrying that the fighters and commanders did not know each other very well. We kept talking about a specific approach to each individual soldier and commander, but what kind of a specific approach could there be when we had not yet really gotten to know people, and there were not 5 or 10 of them, but hundreds? Besides, we had a lot of tests ahead of us, heavy battles, grueling campaigns. Shelter of brigades was known to us. The command or headquarters, 3 battalions, in each of them there were 3 fours, and in the fours there were 3 squads. The battalion was headed by a commander, a commissar, deputy commanders and commissars. A Cheetah was headed by a commander and a commissar, and a squad was headed by a commander and a political delegate. In each squad was also an orderly. Knowledge of weapons, new fighters, the ability to handle them left much to be desired. And we could not afford neither training firing to dispel the fighters' natural fear of weapons, nor even a few tactical classes to familiarize the guerrillas with the basics of modern combat. One single training session held at our place did not, and could not give the fighters and commanders everything they needed. Therefore, when distributing people to battalions and cheetahs, we sought to include in each unit former fighters and newcomers, men and women. But there were too few old partisans who had already smelled the powder in battles. They simply dissolved in the mass of newcomers. It was good that at least there were enough weapons. Each fighter had a rifle or automatic rifle, or even a machine gun, and plenty of ammunition. The weapons, however, were not shot. The fighters did not know how they hit. By May 2, with the help of party and Remsist activists, we had finished distributing people to units. Personally, the composition of the command of the 1st Sofia Brigade was as follows. Commander Islavsho Savev. The Deputy Commander in charge of formation, Kirill Markov. Political Commissar Ninko Stefanov. Deputy Political Commissar and Secretary of the Party Organization, Grigor Aliyev. Intendant Tudor Strigachev. Standard Bearer of the Brigade, Pravda Ryskova. She is also responsible for work with young fighters. 1st Battalion, Commander Vladimir Kostadinov. Deputy Commander Dimitar Pchalinsky. Commissar Slavcho Nikolov Trykov. Deputy Commissar Katya Lepoeva. For communication with the brigade headquarters, Georgy Vladimirov. 2nd Battalion, Commander Georgy Gotsev. Deputy Commander Vasil Zarkov. Commissar Dmitry Grebchev. Deputy Commissar Tasil Nedkov. For communication, Lisain Radichev. 3rd Battalion, Commander Boyko Borisov Izvorsky. Deputy Commander Asen Milanov Iliev. Commissar Lubcho Barimov. Deputy Commissar Lozan Vitanov Marinkov. Having completed the formation of the brigade, we decided to conduct a training march from Kalna to the village of Sierane Travar, where comrades Boyan Bulgaranov, Vlado Trichkov and Diodanka Nikolova were to arrive. The distance between these villages was about 30 kilometers. We travelled them overnight. The next day many people complained that the hike was very forced. Now say you can't move your leg, gay, it hurts. But everything went without an accident. In the village of Sierane Travar, together with our leaders, arrived Smetosol Zavukmanovic and a member of the Supreme Staff of the Yugoslavian PLA and commander of the Macedonian People's Liberation Army Apostolski. A meeting was held between the representatives of the three nations, during which issues related to future joint actions of the liberation forces were discussed. At this meeting it was decided that the Yugoslav, Macedonian and Bulgarian partisan units in the border area would undertake a decisive offensive, mobilize the population of the areas through which the partisans would pass and create a free territory. The task of our new brigade was set by comrades Vado Trichkov and Boyan Bulgaranov. The 1st Sofia People's Liberation Brigade was assigned to go down the valley of the Struma River, where several thousand mobilized Bulgarians were laying the railway line Sofia-Akula, Greece. The brigade was to establish contacts with them, replenish with new fighters from their midst and disband those who do not want to stay with us, destroy the line and thus disrupt the construction deadlines. All this would entail disorganization of transport and supply of the occupation troops in Greece, and would have a huge political and military effect. At the same time, we were instructed to enter into cooperation with partisan detachments in the mountain masses of Rila, Rhodope and Parin to seize and hold the territory by common efforts. Our actions were coordinated with those of the Macedonian partisans. They were to launch an offensive in the areas to the west of the Bulgarian-Yugoslav border to divert the attention and forces of Zerativpik and damage it. This plan also envisioned the actions of the Traian Detachment, renamed the 2nd Sofia People's Liberation Brigade. After the meeting in the village of Sierane Travar was over, our brigade and the party and military leaders returned to Kalna, while only Nacho Ivanov and his wife Vera remained with the British mission. The formation of the brigade, the swearing in of the new fighters to the partisan oath, all this deserved to be an unprecedented celebration. The fighters and commanders put a shine on their equipment and ammunition. Everyone was smoothly shaved and trimmed. Hundreds of inhabitants of Kalna and surrounding villages had gathered. Those who fed us, conducted reconnaissance for us, were constantly ready for us to do anything. Now they rejoiced, looking at their army, the army that protects them from fascist plundering and fights for the freedom and independence of the peoples of Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. The brigade was built in columns by Sheetas. The soldiers, stretched out in a string, looked cheerful and confident. On the right flank froze standard bearers. Spring wind shook the banners. They looked like birds preparing for flight. In the ensuing silence sounded strong, deep voice of our military leader, Vlado Trichkov. Today he was especially excited. The slender ranks of partisans, the great tasks assigned to us by the party, all this worried not only him. Therefore, the words addressed to the fighters and commanders sounded that day as a new way, especially warm and heartfelt. Comrades, you readily responded to the call of the party and thus testified your love for it, love for the people and the fatherland. You have received weapons, you have received ammunition. From today you are fighters of our People's Liberation Army, whose aim is to liberate Bulgaria from fascism. This struggle is and will be waged together with the peoples of the Soviet Union, with the peoples of Yugoslavia and all other peoples who have suffered the same fate. Vlado Trichkov emphasized the importance of the brigade as a fighting unit, spoke about the difficulties awaiting us on the battlefield. He finished his speech with the words, "Nay, I am happy that I have the honor to be the first to announce the name of the newly formed combat unit. It is called the 1st Sofia People's Liberation Brigade. Let it be the first in the fight against the enemy." Then Comrade Trichkov went to the middle of the brigade formation. The ceremony of the partisan oath was to take place. Comrade Trichkov began to clearly and loudly pronounce its solemn words. The brigade, as if one man, repeated them with even greater solemnity, and it was echoed in the hearts of the gathered peasants, this promise coming from the depths of the heart of the fighters to fight honestly and selflessly in the name of the motherland, for the sake of the people. Death to fascism, said in conclusion Vlado Trichkov. Freedom to the people. Rang out the response of several hundred brave and hard as a rock fighters, immediately overflowed into a cheerful partisan song. It carried over the village and the wind unfurled the dark red cloths of the banners, the words written in white, "Long live free, strong, democratic Bulgaria," became. While the brigade was being formed, Rusy Histosovtsov, an instructor of the Central Committee, arrived in Kalna. He had made his way from Sofia with a group of underground fighters, which, as they reached Palilula, had grown to 60 men. In Kalna, this group was greeted with triumph. The brigade drew up, and in front of its front stood the newly arrived partisans. After the command attention was sounded, Rusy Hristosov's groups, "We are the sons of a heroic people. We are ready to give our lives for its liberation." Rusy Hristosov brought a whole bunch of news. The most important of them was that the center of the uprising was being moved to Plovdiv, where by this time 3 members of the Politburo, Yutsola Dragoseva, Dobry Terpeshev, and Anton Yugov, had. Intrine was motivated as follows. In Trine, Breznik, Pyrot, Kumanov, and Kaistendil, the enemy had concentrated large forces and could isolate our party and military leadership from the other 11 zones of the country. It is difficult for me to judge whether these considerations were fully justified. But the direct consequence of all this was the following order of the Troika of the Politburo. Iodanka Nikodova, Vlado Trichkov, Nacho Ivanov, and the Hristo Battalion from the 2nd Brigade to move immediately to Plovdiv, while the Basilevsky Battalion with Georgy Chankov, Secretary of the District Committee, would move to the area of Botevgrad and establish contact with the partisan brigade just formed on the basis of the Shabdar detachment, transfer some weapons to it, and in the future operate together with it in the Sofia direction. As a follow-up to the new decision of the party leadership, the General Staff of the insurgent forces gave the Hristo Battalion the name of the 1st Strike Battalion and its commander Daiko Petrov, the rank of Major, with the intention of appointing him commander of the Plovdiv operational zone in the future. At the same time, Vlado Trichkov was put into the General Staff in charge of combat training of the units. Boyan Bulgaranov became commander and Georgy Chankov became commissar of the Sofia operational zone. In these crucial days for the people, the leaders of the Pasha in the center and in the field, all their thoughts were focused on the best possible organization of the final blow to fascism. Putting themselves in mortal danger, they moved tirelessly, on foot or on horseback, by train or by hitchhiking, from district to district, from one point to another, so that they could always be where they were needed at that moment. In the most difficult conditions, pursued by the enemy, they personally and through instructors led the movement. Not always these invisible threads worked in full measure. Often they were torn by an experienced and still strong enemy, but the guiding, directing activity of the party was constantly felt, and this raised the spirit of thousands and thousands of Bulgarian patriots. After the formation of the brigade was completed in the ceremony of taking the partisan oath, we held bilateral tactical exercises on the scale of the compound. During the exercise, the reconnaissance was to detect a large ambush of the enemy, which was to be destroyed by the main forces of the brigade. That was the intent of the exercise. We drew up brief tasks. Boyan Bulgarinov led the exercise. Although many soldiers and commanders had not received prior training and had not served in the army, their high consciousness and keen interest in the exercises contributed to the fact that everything went without gross errors and the exercises were undoubtedly useful. A few more words about the task assigned to the brigade. First of all, we were to reach the Ryla mountain range in order to get in contact with the Dupnitsky detachment operating there, then to establish contact with the Gornodumai and Rezloshsky detachments and together with them to carry out an action in the Struma Valley. We were aware of the fact that while accomplishing this task, we could encounter serious obstacles and failures. After all, such a large combat unit was to move without preliminary reconnaissance of the route, without systematic replenishment of ammunition, without a supply. And most importantly, on the whole way we were expected a strong and organized enemy. Before the campaign, in all battalions held meetings of communists and members of the RMs. At them, political workers Ninko Stefanov and Grigor Iliv dwelled on the tasks of the communists, talked about the qualities necessary in battle for each fighter. A lot of work was done by our medics. Brigade doctors Todorko Zirkov and Georgy Nastev held special classes with orderlies on first aid, bandaging the wounded, etc. Each soldier was given a gift to the soldiers. Each soldier was given a bandage bag, sterilized bandages and absorbent cotton, and shown how to use it. They made the necessary repairs to shoes, clothing, cleaned weapons. Each man had a duffel bag with all the little things necessary in a soldier's life, a change of underwear, and there the soldiers kept spare magazines and cartridges. May 8, the 1st Brigade lined up in a spacious clearing. The staff took a place on the right flank. On the right of their units stood up battalion commanders I even. Separately built a group of Zilo Demirevsky. The commander of the Dupnitsky detachment with 6 partisans came to us for weapons. And now, heavily laden, they were ready to go back. The brigade commander, Vlado Trichkov and Boyan Bulgarinov, addressed the fighters and commanders. Comrade Bulgarinov knew how to inspire enthusiasm in the soldiers, strengthening the will to victory. His final fiery words addressed to the partisans were imprinted in our memory for a lifetime. Comrade Bulgarinov, "Do you have enough weapons?" "Enough," the whole brigade replied in unison. "Do you have enough ammunition?" "Enough," was the reply. "Do you have capable and loyal commanders who can lead you to a victorious battle with the enemy?" "Yes," answered hundreds of partisans in one breath, and their faces lit up with proud smiles. Then forward, comrades, forward to complete victory over fascism. Long live the patriotic front, long live our glorious Communist Party, long live the Red Army, the great Soviet Union. The response to Bulgarinov's words was a long hurrah, and then the immortal song of Hristo Botev rang out, who in the formidable battle fell for freedom, does not die. With this song we set off on our march. It was decided that Boyan Bulgarinov would go with the brigade. The other comrades who, by decision of the party Politburo, were to move to Plovdiv, stayed in Kalna for the time being to escort them to Plovdiv. The special couple was formed from carefully selected fighters under the command of Ivan Bonev and Dobry Alexiev. We said a heartfelt farewell to those who remained, with whom we had been linked by a joint, albeit short-lived, struggle. Everyone was sure that we would surely meet again. As they say, mountain and mountain do not come together, but man and man will surely meet. And although we were going on a difficult combat trek through an unfamiliar land, everyone hoped to come out of the brutal struggle alive and find their friends alive. We left Kalna at daylight. The inhabitants did not know that we were leaving them for a long time. Otherwise the whole village, hundreds of women, men and children would have come out to see us off. We were worried about these people. They were constantly taking care of the partisans. They had to leave their homes when the police or soldiers appeared in the village, and live in constant expectation that at any moment either their own or strangers might knock on their door. Before crossing the Bolshaya Rudina, on the summit of which the last, already faint glimmers of sunset still lingered, we cast a farewell glance at Kalna. Our column stretched for several hundred meters, and where we had passed, there was a narrow, trampled path. In the morning, when Seth's grandmother would take the cow out to graze, she would surely see where her pigeons had passed, and I was sure she would weep with joy, say, It was not 2 or 3 partisans who passed here, it was a whole army, and the heart of the old woman, who had suffered a lot of grief, would feel warmer. After all, her long-standing dream was being fulfilled. The night was not light, but not dark either. The stars seemed to be burning out, and the moon was playing hide-and-seek with the dark clouds. Ahead rose the sharp hump of the high hill of Ravno-Boucher, on the top of which, like a bouquet in a tall cone-shaped vase, several ancient beeches loomed against the ash-grey sky. When I was a child, I used to climb these beeches in the evenings to look at the white glow cast into the sky by the electric lights of the capital, which was fabulous for us children. I heard a whisper behind me, and I stayed back to find out who was breaking discipline. It turned out to be Velko, one of the first partisans of the Tryaski detachment. I guessed what he was talking about. To our right, we could see a mound that looked like a mushroom stretching out of the ground, and to the left of the mound was a saddle. It was Janikova Chuka, and when Velko saw it, he could not resist telling the novice partisan walking beside him about the brutal battle with the police that had been fought there more than 6 months ago, about the heroic deaths of Stefan, Bojan. Velko himself might have died in that battle if he had not realized to lie low and crawl to a nearby fence. It was this boundary line that saved his life. Velko told the young partisan about how heroically Stefan had held on, about what an important service such boundary lines could serve to a fighter. They must be skillfully used during the battle, said Velko. Neither father nor mother can help a partisan as much as, say, an ordinary boundary, near which you can lie down in battle. Remember, all these boundaries, stones and other local objects allow the fighter to observe the enemy, to hide from his fire. I was reluctant to interrupt Velko, and unnoticed by them, I hurried forward again. When we reached the Rejanov lands, the pace slowed. The crops here are terraced, like a long staircase with enormous steps, almost straight upward. At the edge of each step there was a delay, because the one who had already climbed to the top had to pull up the next soldier in the column like a bucket from a well. The commanders and commissars reminded the fighters how carefully they should treat the peasants' crops. Everyone, from the leader of the column to the one following one, had to follow the trail so that the path we had beaten out looked like a thin thread stretched from the bottom of the ridge to its top, and then the peasants, satisfied that we respected their labour, would say with admiration, "Well, how many people have travelled along such a narrow path, and it's as if not people were walking at all, but a snake crawled through." And in other places, crossing the terrace, we chose such areas where there were no traces left. The trailing columnist covered them with a bundle of twigs. We made up for the time spent climbing up the steep Rayanovsky ridge by getting out on the Sigrelov road. It was wide, about 2.5 meters, and besides, it ran through the forest, so we could walk with shorter intervals. Here was Ogorita, a small ridge, which even the locals do not know why it is called so. Now, Ogorelica is known to hundreds of partisans in all parts of the country. Here on Ogorelica, in September 1943, Minor Veljo, son of Stojan Kasinata, died, and who could have foreseen that 8 months later other sons of the people would fall on the same spot? Who could have foreseen that Moscow radio would talk about this Ogorelica, known only to old shepherds? It happens that an unremarkable place suddenly becomes widely known, imprinted in human hearts by the blood of fallen heroes. The same happens with people. Previously little known to anyone, they become heroes, favourites not only of their own people, but also of peoples of other countries. By midnight we reached the Kryvakuka area. It is a small valley at the foot of Ogorika, adjacent to the northern outskirts of the village of Verkhnaya Milia. Here we made a short break. First the men of the 1st Battalion went down to the ground, then the 2nd Battalion, Shiloh's group, and finally the 3rd Battalion. In front, 300 to 400 metres, the column was guarded by a reinforced outpost. The same guard provided security for the column from the rear. The brigade command was located between the 1st and 2nd Battalions because from here it was most convenient and quickest to control the units. There were 3 liaisons, smart, quick-witted guys, members of the Workers' Union of Youth. The halt was made for the command to clarify the conditions of the brigade's location in the village of Verkhnaya Melna, the outskirts of which could be seen from here. During the halt, no one was allowed to leave the column without the permission of his commander. Everyone sat down on the ground, took off his satchel or duffel bag, put it next to him, or even just leaned on it without taking it off, never letting go of his weapon. The guerrillas had a law not to lay their weapons on the ground, and they strictly observed it. The sentinel also knew his task. While others are resting, he must scout the area around, collect data on the enemy. In a word, to ensure the continued safe movement of the brigade. Our scouts had already visited the village the day before. They reported that no army or police forces had been seen in any of the surrounding villages, but that did not relieve us of the obligation to check everything again. The sentries must have already gone down to the Mahala Tchaikovsky. Perhaps they had awakened the white-haired grandmother Stasia, the same one who more than 6 months ago had given us a full pot of butter from her generous heart. Perhaps she had assured the sentries that there was no danger. At any rate, she had seen neither soldiers nor gendarmes. Maybe we, Bon Bulgarinov, Ninko Stefanov, Zaitan and I would have remained confident that everything was quiet around us, if an enemy machine gun had not suddenly crackled from the bushes nearby. All those who had come out for reconnaissance instantly lay down. It could be either an ambush or a patrol which, like us, was studying the terrain. The trail on which we were lying down was covered from the enemy by a high boundary line. This allowed us to crawl back to the column and take control of it again. While I was giving instructions to the battalion commanders on how to act in the situation, some impatient and undisciplined soldiers opened fire and thus revealed the presence of the brigade. Had this not happened, we could have withdrawn unnoticed, giving the enemy the impression that he had run into some small group. However, the rumble of our 24 handheld machine guns and about 100 automatic rifles testified not to a group, but to a solid partisan unit. It became clear that Ogoritsa was occupied by some military unit. This, as it later turned out, was a battalion of the 13th Kustendil Regiment. I remember when the Trinsky detachment was returning to Kalna after accomplishing a combat task in Kustendil Kolya. This very battalion was sitting on our shoulders the whole time. Then we still managed to break away from it, and the battalion, tired of the long pursuit, stayed near Ogorelika for a rest. And now, at the mercy of our impatient fighters, instead of quietly, stealthily getting out of contact with the enemy, we had to fight in disadvantageous conditions. The enemy occupied the heights, equipped positions for machine guns and mortars, shot the approaches to their trenches. Meanwhile, the firing intensified. Now not only bullets were whistling, mines began to fall. They burst with a deafening rumble, throwing clouds of smoke and earth into the air. People who first come under such fire often turn to flee. They cannot be held back, and the panic created by them infects dozens of others, even experienced fighters. In this situation, it was most expedient to strike one unit to the flank of the enemy, to divert his attention and at this time to pull back the main forces of the brigade to the Jelovitsa forest near Ogorelika. If the enemy rushes after us, it is easier to keep the defence and manoeuvre in the forest, and this also could not be neglected. And if everything went quietly and peacefully, from there we could continue on our route. The 3rd Battalion, which went to the flank of the enemy, I ordered to go further to the rear, to disrupt the enemy fighting order and then join the main forces. I stopped on this battalion also because both Boyko Borisov, who commanded it, and Commissar Luka Barimov were proven men. The 3rd Battalion took the initial position and went on the attack. Shilo and the men of his group, who were lying next to the 3rd Battalion, heard what task was assigned to him and also moved forward through the forest. The small but very mobile and perfectly armed group was ahead of the battalion and came out northeast of the height. The commander of the 3rd Battalion with a squad of Maidan Mikhailov strongmen, which had a new hand machine gun, operated to the left of Gelo. They attacked the position of the enemy's machine gun squad and suppressed this point. Following the commander led the battalion political commissar Barimov. Covering the Meshoy, the soldiers fired on a group of enemy soldiers lying in the bushes and then rushed into the attack. To the left of the battalion, and a little ahead of him with a dozen partisans, moved Comrade Bogdan Boshkov, a soldier who escaped from the Tsarist army. He still wore a soldier's uniform, and this helped him to recognize the enemy's password. Having memorized it, Bogdan slowly crawled up to the machine gun position. The squad noticed Bogdan near the trench and asked him the password. Bogdan answered. Having calmed down, the soldiers straightened up. One of them said, "You devil, why didn't you immediately signal that you were your own?" and moved towards him. Only then the soldier saw that after Bogdan a group of partisans was coming up. In a moment the soldier was gone, and the others rushed after him. Only one machine gun remained at the position. Bogdan stepped towards it. From the place where the machine gunners fled, opened fire several machine guns and mortars of the enemy. Mines were falling in the fighting order of the 3rd Battalion. They were also bursting in the crops, through which the other 2 battalions were pulling back. One mine fell near Bogdan. The explosion felled the brave partisan. His right arm was numb, splinters cut into his body. Alone and helpless, he lay in a small clearing next to a crater dug by a mine, and there was no one to come to his aid. His comrades scattered from the frequent bursts of mines and the downpour of machine gun fire. One of the mines exploded in Lupcho's group and wounded him and a young partisan. The shrapnel opened a wide wound in Lupcho's right abdomen. In order not to be captured, Lupcho slowly, with great effort, crawled to a small clearing, where he unexpectedly found a wounded Bogdan Bozhkov, his battle friend. Here both guerrillas lay for a long time, unnoticed by anyone. The other 2 battalions also had a hard time. On the way to the forest, their column fell into a zone of mortar fire from the enemy. Sudden bursts upset the column. Many partisans who were in such a situation for the first time scattered, tried to hide in the most inappropriate places, where they were threatened with either certain death or the danger of getting lost. Therefore, it was necessary to specially allocate fighters who, at the risk of their lives, searched for the confused newcomers and accompanied them to the assembly points. In Sulaim, the situation would have been even worse if on the right flank of our attacked group suddenly broke out a fierce firefight. Zelo made an attack. He was supported by several machine guns. Lupcho Barimov's men, in order to get out from under the mortar fire, moved towards the summit and joined Zelo. The attack was so decisive that neither machine guns nor mortars helped the enemy. In disorder, he retreated to the Mahala of Trixkonica. Gelo took advantage of this and before dawn imperceptibly pulled the fighters to the forest west of the village, where they remained all day. Using Zilo's success, Boyko Borisov with a group of 30 men also went on the attack and drove back the enemy. While fighting, the partisans did not notice how they broke away from Zelo and from the main forces of the brigade. 2 fighters, whom Borisov sent to look for the brigade headquarters, did not return. The battalion commander was forced to move with his group at random. They completely lost their bearings and only after 7 days were able to establish contact with us. For our part, we also repeatedly tried to contact Jello and the 3rd Battalion, but these attempts were unsuccessful. While leading the thinning column, Boyko Borisov remembered Lupcho Barimov and Bogdan Bozhkov. He stepped aside, let all the fighters pass, but among them he did not see either of them. It was obviously useless to look for them. Borisov assumed that they had joined Gelo and gave the order to continue moving. In the meantime, the 2 severely wounded battle friends were lying side by side in a clearing. A spreading bush carefully sheltered them from enemy eyes. They could hardly restrain their groans, fearing not to be heard by the enemy. The whole day of May 9 we spent in the Yelovitsky forest. The first thing we did was to make a check. Almost 100 people were missing, half of them, as we supposed. During the battle had separated with Zilo's group, 35 men. With the 3rd Battalion, as for the other 15, in addition to a few killed and wounded were those who simply returned home. The main reason for the confusion was that we lacked the ability to maintain stable communication in battle, to manage the fighters. The fear that engulfed people under the hail of mines also did its work. Everyone's mood after the battle was bad. Both we, commanders and fighters, were acutely worried that the brigade lost so many people. We do not know what happened to them. In no case it was impossible to give the fighters into the power of despondency and confusion. Therefore, we instructed the communists to talk to the fighters, to give the right assessment of what happened. It was not enough for us all these misfortunes, so in the afternoon added a new one. One of the guerrillas, he took the pseudonym Botevi, while sleeping under a bush, did not notice how he got caught on a limb with the cotter pin of a grenade hanging from his belt, and when he turned to the other side in his sleep, the pin popped out and the grenade exploded. The unexpected explosion brought the whole camp to its feet. He himself was blown to pieces, and the 4 men lying nearby were badly wounded. This misfortune, of course, added to the bad mood of the men, but worse, the enemy, attracted by the explosion, could easily discover us, and where to dispose of the wounded was not an easy task either. There was nothing left but to entrust them to a few partisans, residents of these places. They were to take care of the wounded, and when they recovered, together with them to join the group left in Okainia for sabotage actions. The need to collect data on the results of the battle and to study the situation prompted us to temporarily deviate from the route and head towards the village of Errol. This way we hoped to throw the enemy off the trail and avoid a new collision with him. Semi-get provisions we had taken with us from Kaune came to an end. The bags we had on our shoulders had become weary. Hundreds of mouths were begging for food, but where could we get it when the surrounding villages were packed with troops and police? But even if there were none, would it be easy for our peasants to spare hundreds of kilograms of bread from the meagre supplies left them by the authorities? For now it is not like before. When we were few in number, neither 5 nor 50 nor 100 kilograms can do us any good, and yet we must try to go down to the village. After all, if we could not get 1 kilogram per soul, we could do with less. On our way to Errol, which is far from the town, we passed Barina Hollow. We did not hold out much hope of getting anything from the poor people living there. We decided to turn to our kind Aunt Stana just in case. We stopped for half an hour. During this time, Auntie Stana woke up everyone in the village, took some bread and cheese from some of them, and accompanied by several other villagers came running to us. "Where are you going? How many of you are you very hungry? Is this enough?" she asked, hugging everyone. "Take it, eat, be fortified, and hit these fascist scum, that they have neither bottom nor tire." With Auntie Stana came her little daughter Vaska. She was crazy about partisans. Sometimes she would send the sheep out to graze, and she would look around the bushes and bushes with her eyes to see if there were any partisans lurking there. Aunt Stana would start to criticize her for neglecting her needlework, but she would show her the scarlet 5-pointed stars. "Well," says her mother, "if you sue them, it's good. Everyone must do some good." Everyone in the village called Vaska Lisica for her cunning and cleverness. What can I say? The food collected by Aunt Stana was only enough for us to eat. But still we had more strength. It was easier to climb the steeps. By dawn we reached Errol village, approaching it from the side of Marinka Mahala. 5 or 6 families lived there. The wealthiest of them was Grandfather Kota's family. The rest were the poor, the rolling stone. They had enough setar for 2 or 3 months after the harvest. Here we had a pleasant surprise. We met Bipesho and Slavsho, who were returning from Radomir district at the head of a group of partisans. They had no weapons, so we decided to turn back to Kauna, arm them, and then continue the march to Rila. In Marinka Mahala, we also met several local underground fighters from the villages of Errol and Mislovstika, including Peter Madenov and Simo Veselinov. Thus, about 100 new fighters gathered in the Mohal. Among them, Boyan Bulgarinov saw someone from his acquaintance, exchanged a few phrases with him. "No, who is this?" I asked Bulgarinov later. "Yonko Panov, who has left the party," he answered Bulgarinov. "We'll make him chief of staff. Since he ate the party's bread for several years while he was getting his military education, let him do something for the party now." I did not know Panov and could not say anything. Well, as for the post of chief of staff, there is something to prove himself. The organization of combat training of personnel, intelligence, communications, conscientiously performs his duties or not. It will be clear literally in the first few days. At night we moved to the center of the village. The next day, at the suggestion of our Yatuks by Basil, Grandfather Stanko, Grandfather Milan and Grandfather Gurdin, a big feast was organized. Partisans, peasants, and peasant women, boys, girls, and children came together for it. The boys were all trying to touch at least a rifle or a machine gun, and if you just beckoned them with a gun, they would follow us in a flash. Children and young people are somehow especially attracted to weapons. There was a lively conversation at the table. The peasants were asking the partisans where they were from, what was the fate of their parents, how long the struggle would last, what our power would be, and many other things. I was answered thoroughly, explaining that the struggle was nearing completion, but that there were still many difficulties to be overcome, that the future power would be the power of the people, that the fascists would stand before the people's court, that the closest and most intimate relations with the Soviet Union would be established, that the people would be given full freedom. It would be good if everything were as you say. They answered us, how fed up we are with the present yoke, and if only for a year or two, but we have been dragging this burden all our lives. If only something would change for the better for us. It will change, ours assured us. Just a little more patience. And the most important thing, help us as much as you can, help us, then we will achieve victory faster. We are helping and will continue to help, but it is hard for us too. said an old woman. I am like a finger alone. I have no sons. My master died last year. I have a little bit of land, but there is no one to plough it, so it remains empty. There was a little cow, and it died. No matter what kind of grief I'm going through, it never passes me by. I don't know where I will go, what will happen to me. Ninko looked at the old woman from head to toe. She was skinny, and she was wearing nothing but her soul. Her clothes were patch on patch, her bare feet were barefoot, and she had neither stockings nor shoes. What help could one expect from this decrepit, sick, poor woman? Somebody should have helped her. Ope reached into his pocket and pulled out a 500-lever piece of paper. No, take it, Ninko said. We give it from the bottom of our hearts. Buy some flour so that you don't starve. Buy some shoes, you can't go barefoot. Oh, my son, God bless you. After all, what does it turn out? After all, it's for us to give you, and here, and tears flowed down her wrinkled cheeks. The table's excitement was growing. The voices sounded louder and more heated. At that time, Boyan Bulgarinov got up, looked around the gathered, and when they fell silent, began a passionate, fiery speech. People froze in their seats and listened. We will defeat fascism. There is no doubt about it, Bulgarinov said in conclusion, and we will leave no trace of the fascist machine. We will sweep it away. It is only necessary to raise the whole nation for this. Everyone must join the active struggle to give fascism a final deadly blow. We have the strength of this. These several hundred perfectly armed fighters are equal to several thousand Tsarist soldiers, because the Tsar's soldiers are also sons of the people and do not want to fight for the Tsarist interests against their own people. Write to your sons, brothers, relatives, that they should not shoot at the partisans, that they should run away from the barracks and come to us. Take a look at our army and see if they should join us or not. What do you say? Bulgarinov asked the peasants. An old man stood up here. You are the true army of the people. And how can it be? You have entered the village. You are sitting with us, talking to us as if with your parents. But those, they call them gendarmes or something else. I don't know. As soon as they appear in the village, everything hides as if not people, but a fierce beast has come. They seize everyone they meet, whoever they catch. It's a Bezman army, not ours. Comrade Bulgarinov liked the old man's statement very much. He praised him, and then, addressing all those gathered, recalled the heroic traditions of the Bulgarian soldiers when they fought for a just cause. The partisan leader's words elicited noisy support from those present. Well, Slavo, turned to me Bulgarinov. And you say a few words. I dwelled on the situation at the fronts, told about the great successes of the Red Army, called on the peasants to provide even more firm resistance to the attempts of local authorities to pursue their anti-people policy. And then the general festivities began. Some sang songs, others drove choro, others talked. Everyone was happy, both we and the peasants, and most of all our yataks. You see, said by Vasil, the whole village is behind you. And if the police or gendarmes came tomorrow, everyone would hide, no one would go to them. He said it with pride, and he was absolutely right. If the people of Ewell had such a good feeling for the partisans, it had to be attributed first of all to the party, which explained the situation correctly and showed the people the right way. And the party was represented here by several old miners, associates of Temko Nenkov and Georgy Dimitrov. They were our glorious Yataks by Vasil, Grandfather Milan, Grandfather Gurgin, Grandfather Stanko, and Grandfather Kota. Before leaving Eril, we held a brief meeting of the brigade command. It was attended by Mr. Pesko, Slavcho Radomirski, and Georgy Grigorov. Since the 1st Brigade was going outside the Okoli, and the 2nd Brigade had not yet returned from the campaign, we considered it advisable to allocate 2 groups of 20 well-armed men for action in Radomir and Hrinsko-Okoli. These groups were to form the core of the new detachments, which would include all those who had not been mobilized in time, as well as those comrades who were to go into an illegal situation. The leadership of the groups was entrusted to Slavcho Radomirski in Radomir district and Georgy Grigorov in Trina district. Georgy Avramov stayed behind to coordinate the work in several Okoli in our zone. By Pesho and Slavcho immediately went to Radomir Okoli, and the brigade, with which Georgy Grigorov stayed, went to Kalna. On the way to Kalna, we came down to the village of Byzancy, to its northwestern outskirts, not far from Uncle Kolo's house. I called a halt and hurried to him to find out the news. Uncle Kolo told me with grief about his useless trip to Sofia Okolia, about the ordeals and fears he had suffered. He got up in the early morning, woke up his household. They took the weapons out of the cache and loaded them on the cart. They covered them with pottery and straw. With Uncle Kolo went also his younger daughter Vitka. They travelled for 2 days and 2 nights. They travelled through Trine, Dragoman, Slivnica, worried about the police more than once and more than twice, until finally they reached the village of Maslovo in Sofia district, where people from the Shavdar detachment were waiting for them. Maslovo is only a dozen kilometres from the capital. Uncle Kolo harnessed the horses, unloaded pots and jugs, and began to trade. They waited for an hour, 2 hours, half a day, a whole day. 2 days passed, nobody came. Almost all the goods were sold out. There was no reason to linger in Maslovo. There was a little man there, asking about the partisans, and he even bought a jug. But since he didn't tell them his password, Uncle Kolo didn't trust him. And rightly so, of course. He's an unknown man. How can you trust him? So, extremely upset that though not through his own fault, but still did not fulfill the party assignment, Uncle Kotlu, having experienced many anxious minutes, returned back and brought the weapons back. Well, that's good for us, Uncle Kolu. Of course, the Shavdars need weapons, but we need them now no less. Get them. There's 100 new partisans waiting for weapons under the village. 100 souls. Uncle Kohu was amazed. Where did they get so many people? 100 new guerrillas, he continued to marvel. Not 100, but 500 new ones. So we have a whole division now, I joked. A division? How can you feed so many? Exclaimed the kindly man. Hey, the people are alive, Uncle Kolo, they will feed us. Now get your weapons out quickly. Uncle Kohu got worried that time was running out and he was wasting it. He rushed to the barn, where he had a special cache of several machine guns, rifles and grenades. I called a group of fighters. They took all this and carried it away. Uncle Kolo couldn't resist. He carried a few rifles, not so much to help as to look at the partisan division. We shall have a division, I thought. But now let him look at a part of it. Uncle Kolo looked at the fighters crouched along the road, but, try as he might, he could not see the edge of the column. Look, there are many, very many, he exclaimed, rejoicing that our army was growing so fast. But I could not do as I should. Of course, it was not his fault. It was the fault of others, those who did not give the agreed password in time. I handed out weapons to the men, and that night we reached the pine forest northwest of Turakifsi. At dawn, the weather broke up, the sky darkened, fog enveloped everything, and later it started to rain. Around noon, from the direction of Havanipsi village, we heard the sounds of fierce machine gun and rifle fire, then we heard explosions. The firing increased and then quieted down, moreover, it was constantly moving. It went on like that for about an hour, until it distanced itself in the direction of the village of Verknyaya Melna and stopped. An alarming silence settled over the plain. However, it did not last long. On the highway Trine Sitelfinven, Verknyaya Melna, dozens of trucks moved at breakneck speed. One by one they disappeared behind the distant hills. The traffic was too wee, there with policemen, soldiers and ammunition back empty. Clearly, the entire garrison of Trine was being moved. But why? What happened? It remained unclear, and there was no one to inform us. Only the next day, when we moved to the village of Kravenyabuka and met there some fighters of the Macedonian battalion of Charov, we learned about the fierce battle of Macedonian, Bulgarian and Yugoslav partisans with the troops of General Boydev. The operation, long prepared by the Fascist command, was in full swing. After we left Kalna, the Trine detachment, 2 Macedonian brigades, 2 Serbian brigades, of Charov's battalion and other units gathered near the village on May 10-12. In Kalna at the same time were Vlado Trichkov, Iordanka Nikolova, Apostolsky and the British military mission. By this time, the fascists had almost finished the concentration of troops for the so-called May Offensive, which was supposed to move about 40,000 men, and hurried to strike while the partisans were in Kyle, tired and exhausted by the heavy campaign, to some extent lost their fighting ability. In Kalny, the ceremony of renaming the Trine detachment into the 2nd Sofia People's Liberation Brigade was to take place, but the situation now was not at all favourable for celebrations. The enemy was concentrating troops and equipment, strengthening its strike groups and intelligence, reported the arrival of more and more new forces. Having assessed the situation, the comrades decided to strike first, in different directions, before the enemy took the initial position for the attack, to disrupt his battle orders, to disrupt the implementation of his plan, and then get out of contact with him. On May 12, 2 Macedonian brigades broke through in the area of Bolshaya Rudina and Barnos, dispersed the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and Lieutenant Colonel Stoichev's gendarmes, crossed into Bulgarian territory near the villages of Slitovtsu, Renalug and Glavanovci, and moved south through Trinska, Radomir and Kustendil Okali to return to Macedonian territory at the end of this campaign. At the time when 2 Macedonian brigades broke the enemy ring near Bolshaya Rudina and Barnos, the 2nd Sofia Brigade and 2 Serbian brigades pushed back the enemy in the direction of Tumba, Design Kladenak, and by the end of the day, under the cover of darkness, moved to the Suha Planina Ridge to the town of Leskovac. The 2nd Sofia Brigade, having been tasked to redeploy to the Stara Planina Massif, separated from the Yugoslav units and set a course to the north and northeast. Ferdinand Pudev's couple was supposed to follow the brigade, but it hesitated when leaving Kalna and fell behind the brigade. And together with the couple, the radio operators Ivap Paishev and Pavel Tsavulanov, who were to get with the 2nd Brigade to Plovdiv and deliver the radio necessary for the party leadership to communicate with Moscow, with Georgy Dimitrov, fell behind. Since this happened, we now had to organize their transfer to Plovdiv. In this we counted on a few partisans from the village of Batak, Plovdiv district, who knew the route very well. They were the forester Vasil Serafimov, Stefan Vasilev, Evtim Panchev and Tosko Vanchev. Thus, not a little, not at all, but we were late and could not meet with the 2nd Brigade to organize interaction, to distribute former partisans and newcomers, to solve organizational issues. Kalna now presented an even worse sight. The houses and other buildings that had survived the previous fires were now burned by the furious fascists. The population fled into the forest, the cattle were taken away. On the place of the village remained a huge ashes. The picture was enlivened only by women and children who returned and gathered and stacked stones and branches in order to have at least some roof over their heads. And in these hard days, when it seemed that the inhabitants of Kalna could think of nothing else but themselves and their hearth, they again gave us a helping hand, provided us with the only thing that could be saved from the fire, sprouted potatoes. We could not wish for anything else in this sad situation. Here we learned details about the unfolding battles, about the 2nd Brigade. We immediately sent contact men to catch up with it, but without success. It had already gone far away. It was an agonizing pity that before such a long and risky march, I had not been able to see Dencho and Delcho in my first battle friends. But that was the way things were. Our depots, on which we had counted so much, were empty of arms, clothing, and ammunition. Everything was used up. We found only a few pairs of shoes and clothes, which our intendant Slavcho Tsitkov had stashed away to exchange with the peasants for a chicken or a... He was a great glutton. At that time, Vidoya, Smiluski and Burko were in Kalna. They had just received their weapons. At one time we had lent them some of our weapons, agreeing that when we needed them they would pay us back. Now the need has arisen. In this way we managed to arm our new guerrillas. While in Kalny we learned that in the villages of Krovina Jabuka and Radosin there was a group of wounded soldiers of the 2nd Brigade. They had no doctor, no orderly, not even bandages and iodine. The peasants treated them with folk remedies as their worldly experience suggested to them. They washed their wounds with rakija and bandaged them with flaps torn from their shirts. Milk and eggs, to the detriment of their own children, were saved for the wounded. Around the haylofts where they were housed, a constant watch was established. Everyone, from small children to old women of the most advanced years, was on duty. We stayed in Kalna for a few days. At that time Boyko Borisov, commander of the 3rd Battalion, returned with a group of 35 soldiers. Among them, and received 17 wounds, Bogdan Boshkov. During these days we transferred to Kalna wounded soldiers of the 2nd Brigade. Radio operators Pachev and Saviolanov fought with army and gendarme units that were pulling back to the Bulgarian territory. The fate of Bogdan Boshkov and Lupcho Barimov was different. Bogdan found himself in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Just by a miracle he managed to avoid death, and he reached Kalny completely exhausted. Lupcho Barimov went the other way, was captured by enemies and then shot. Identity went well for him. Kind people sheltered him in one of the kosharas in the village of Rayanopsi. Lapcho rested there, almost recovered, and was about to go on his way when a traitor was found who reported him to the police. They immediately surrounded the cowsheds and seized Lapcho. After the brutal tortures to which he was subjected in the Triano-Curly office and the police station in the village of Strezimirovsi, Lapcho was taken to the field and killed. On May 17, we were in the Terziska Mahala of the village of Kalna. Our cooks prepared beef for lunch and instead of bread, potatoes. Only the soldiers started to eat. A liaison from Daishan Kladinets ran to the headquarters with the news that enemy units were advancing on the village. In Daishan Kladinets, we had set up a combat guard. Its task was to detect the enemy and delay them. If there were few enemies, and if there were many, to notify us immediately. Except for Bulgarinov, none of us had military training, but practice helped us to internalize a number of military rules, which we strictly observed. One of them was to try to occupy the heights dominating the terrain, and if the enemy manages to surround us, a decisive attack to break through the enemy ring and break away from the enemy. This tried and tested rule the brigade command decided to apply now. Without wasting time, we moved battalions to MT. Tumba with the task of occupying it and adjacent heights, to organize the defense and then attacking the enemy to throw him back. However, it is not easy to climb up the steeps in a few minutes. The report came to us with a great delay, so the battalions had time to occupy only the top of Tumba. There was no time for the neighbouring heights. Having thrown our couple off the Daishan Kladinets heights, the enemy, consisting of a battalion of the 41st Infantry Regiment, a company of gendarmes and several other police gendarme units, took possession of the heights south of Tumba, Mirosovo Dera Sulin Grob, and began to quickly entrench themselves. By this he deprived us of a serious advantage. The only thing left for us was to hold Tumba firmly, and by actions on the flanks to damage the enemy and force him to withdraw. In order to fulfill this plan, the following orders were given. 1st Battalion to occupy the eastern slopes of Sulin Grob Height, 2nd Battalion, leaving part of the forces on Tumba, to concentrate at the foot of Mirosovo Derevo Height. Thus we blocked the enemy, leaving him a corridor only from the side of the Daishan Kladinets Height. The reserve of the brigade commander was located on Tumba, where we moved our command post, and Zlatan, whose subordination was transferred to one department, was assigned the task of making surprise strikes on the most sensitive places of the enemy fighting order, primarily from the southwest, from the rear. Communication with battalion commanders was carried out by liaison officers who delivered oral and written reports and orders. All the afternoon the parties probed each other, conducted intensive reconnaissance. We were looking for the weakest point in the enemy, he and us, to force us to withdraw. These searches were accompanied by shooting and mutual attacks of small units. We waited impatiently for darkness, the most convenient time for us. However, it seemed that the enemy was counting on it very much. Toward evening hours, from both sides fired at the Mirosovo Derevo Heights. They began fire preparation of the attack. The enemy immediately responded with machine guns, automatic rifles, mortars. With each minute the firefight was getting fiercer, the tension of the battle was growing. It reached the highest point when the partisan hurrah rang out, swept over the positions and sank in the increasing frequency of mine bursts. Ours rushed to the attack. A fierce battle boiled over. In the air sounded the whistle of mines. Explosions rumbled. In the trench of Comrade Bulgarinov fell our youngest partisan Gosho, a liaison from the 1st Battalion. In Gosho's hand was clutched a report from the commander. In it, Vladimir Kostaripov reported that the battalion had managed to break into the enemy's location, but he stubbornly resisted. We will fight to the last, but in no case will not shame ourselves before our glorious party. So ended the report. These words excited all of us. I quickly passed the instructions to Ivan and sent Gosho back. He clutched the machine gun under his arm and, childishly joyful, started to run. The enemy held firm, counteracted our advance by all means, but especially strong resistance met the fighters at the height of Sulin Grob. The information we received at the brigade command post was more comforting than the other. Only from Zlatan has not yet received a single report. This worried us, especially since he was assigned the task of sabotage, to establish contact with Zlatan and to establish his interaction with the 1st Battalion. We sent Georgy Grigorov. Unfortunately, it turned out that Zlatan left the battle, went down to the nearest Mahala, where we later found him resting peacefully. Only I informed the zone commander that the 2nd Battalion was not responding, as a sentry of the headquarters brought the battalion liaison officer to us. Comrade Commander, we captured 5 soldiers with a machine gun. Where are they? Over there, in the bushes. And he pointed towards the village. Well done, said Bulgarinov. Did you interrogate them? We have. The enemy is preparing to withdraw. There are good men among the prisoners. Guard them closely, ordered Bulgarinov. And then we'll sort out who is good and who is not. Tell the battalion commander to be in constant fire contact with the enemy. Press on him. Let's go. The liaison, clearly feeling that he was performing one of the most important tasks in this hot battle, sharply pulled his right hand away from his temple, clearly turned around and disappeared. In battle, time flees imperceptibly. All of us missed the moment when the stars shone in the sky and the moon's sickle hung a palm above Dishan Baby. The moonbeams would try to reach the enemy's positions, but the tall beeches blocked their way. Gosho crawled up to our trench. He got up and stood at attention, but this time he looked extremely dejected and sad. Comrade Ivan was killed, Gosho barely audibly reported. During the attack on the heights he was pierced by an enemy. Gosho did not finish. His throat was squeezed. You left him in enemy hands? Asked the Chief of Staff. No, we took him out. Gosho answered in a changed voice. We took him to the koshar under the height. Boyan Bulgarinov raised his hand and saluted, and we did the same in memory of the glorious commander. So, Ivan did not shame himself before the party, said the commander of the zone. The party will never forget his feat. He patted Gosho on the shoulder and told him to tell the battalion commissar to take command. The commander of the reserve for Bulgarinov ordered to prepare everything for the funeral of the killed combatant. A mine whistled over our heads. It hit the ground a few steps from our trench and exploded. Those idiots found us, angrily said Bulgarinov, and ordered everyone to move to the right. We had no sooner overcome a few meters, as the second mine whistled. Nudarin, crawl faster, shouted Bulgarinov, from the direction of the Mirasovo-Derevo heights. We heard shouts of forward, and then the song Chavdartsi. The men of the 1st Battalion were singing, and with the names of Levski and Botivi on their lips they were going to attack. After a while the mortars fell silent. The enemy's machine guns also fell silent. Now only our machine guns and automatic rifles were firing. A loud command was heard, and a friendly hurrah sounded from the heights. Listen, smiled Bulgarinov. This is ours. Holding our breath, we listened to the forest and mountains repeated the partisan hurrah. At the same time, in the area of the village of Krovino Jabuka, 2 Yugoslav brigades were fighting with enemy battalions. One of them was commanded by Beko, after our meeting with him and Smilevsky in Jabukovic. Beko arrived in the evening at Tumba, from where the whole arrangement of the troops was perfectly visible. The fighting orders of the Yugoslav partisans were being worked from cannons and machine guns by fighter planes. The metal birds descended almost to the ground, then again gained altitude. This was repeated several times until one of the planes went up in smoke. Then flames burst out of its belly, and like a badly wounded vulture, it stuck its nose into the rock. With Biko, we coordinated the night actions of our units, determined what forces and means of our and his brigades, with the onset of darkness, will be pursued by the enemy. Behind the height of Mirasovo-Derevo, a green rocket flashed. Then a second, a third. Loud shouts slowly receded and were silenced in the dense beech forest. Having successfully accomplished the task of clearing the area of enemy forces, 2 brigades, ours and the Yugoslavian, the next day moved towards the Vietoplanina Ridge, where, acting shoulder to shoulder, defeated another enemy battalion. That was the end of the fascist offensive. Prepared for a month, it reached its highest point on May 12 and 13. At stake was absolutely everything at the disposal of the fascist command. Troops, police, gendarmerie, artillery, cavalry. The Nazi command set as its task, no more, no less, to destroy the partisans operating in the area. In the order of General Boydev on May 10 in the section Moral Preparation said the following: to inculcate in all ranks that in the course of this action the aim is to do away with all partisans in the area, down to the last organized group, and that the actions of all must be courageous, energetic and decisive. It is necessary to demonstrate how inevitable is the blow of the iron fist of the Bulgarian army when it defends the prestige of power and its honour. It was evident from the above passage that the Bulgarian army was used not to defend the national interests of the people, but to defend the prestige of the regime imposed on the people and the art of the fascist generals and officers who did not think of the people at all, but faithfully served the German enslavers and their Bulgarian henchmen. They sold both their honour and their homeland to the Germans. The fascists prepared the May offensive much longer than the March Operation Raydon, concentrated 10 times as large forces. However, as in March, they again failed. Fascist plans turned out for the Bulgarian people new human casualties and material deprivation. On the way to the Vertoplanina Ridge, from where we were to turn towards the Rila Massif, we passed the village of Darkovci. Here we met Ferdinand Pudev's family and radio operators Ivan Payshev and Pavel Savulepov. At Virotop we parted with Biko. He moved towards the village of Kierane Trava. We moved towards the village of Lasina. When the brigade was going up to Vitop, we suddenly came across troops moving from the direction of the village of Kierane Trava. Bloody battles ensued on the heights and mountain plateaus. In some places the fascists managed to cut into our fighting order. In other areas we broke into their positions. It came to hand fighting. In the end we managed to disperse the enemy units to throw him off the heights. He fled, and the brigade continued its way to the village of Lasina. During one skirmish, Asencio and Victoria were captured. She saw how the enemies piled on Asencio, but he did not know that Victoria was also in their hands. In the evening, the bound Asencio was taken to the police station in the village of Lavarnitsi. When he was pushed into the cell, he was horrified to see his sister there, her face bruised and bloody, her dress torn. The next day they were transferred to the Okali office and locked in different cells. Long and agonizing interrogations began. When the executioners got tired of using their fists, they used rubber truncheons, whips, and whatever else they could get their hands on. Asen and Victoria were silent. This infuriated their enemies even more. Tell me who brought you into the squad. The policeman shouted so that the veins in his neck protruded. Mother, Victoria spoke out. Why, to make brigands out of you? No, she said we were evacuating to a village. Yeah, so that bitch didn't even tell me where she was taking you. Our mom's not a bitch. Yes, she didn't tell us, but everything she did, we know it, she did the right thing. Nessen couldn't stand it. Ah, you still object. The policeman raged. He brought a stick down on Asen's back. Then came a blow on his face. Asen fell down, blood dripping from his nose. Why are you falling? Hold on, you're a revolutionary. The policeman taunted him. Victoria was also tortured in the same way, but none of them gave the executioners either the names of the Yataks or the villages through which they had passed after getting off the train. In the morning, large sheets of paper were hung on the chest and back of the brother and sister with the inscription, Mothers, take care of your children. And 2 policemen led them through the streets of the town. The inhabitants turned away, showing their indignation at the vile act of the police. But the suffering of the young partisans did not end there. A week later they were sent to the Radomir Okali administration and locked up in a stable. There the police kept one wounded partisan. He was not given any medical care. His wounds were inflamed. They smelled of rotting meat. But this was not enough for the police. Beating him, they tried to hit him on his wounds, causing the partisan unbearable suffering. Then the police began to beat Asencio and Victoria. For days and nights on end, moans and screams came from the stables. Then the young men were sent to Sofia. Here they were subjected to even more sophisticated methods. Torture with insomnia, electricity, ice baths. The police needed confessions that could serve as incriminating material against the partisans, but Asencio and Victoria endured these tortures. Having failed to extract confessions from them, the police were forced to release them on bail. On tense, difficult days when we were tired and hungry, and some of us were even despondent, we would receive some joyful news that would give us all strength. I remember with what joy the soldiers and commanders of my brigade welcomed the news that a new brigade had been created in the town of Lebain, in Serbia, from soldiers who had escaped from the terrorist army. It was named after Georgy Dimitrov. The corps of the new brigade was made up of soldiers from one of the battalions of the 123rd Sliven Regiment. After reforming in Sliven, in December 1943. This battalion was sent to Libana for occupation service. Upon mobilization, comrades Atanas Gusev, Kiro Ignatov, Viljo Vilev, Dimitar Baev, Yordan Yordanov, Ivan Marinov and others joined the battalion. They held officer and non-commissioned officer positions there, fulfilling the instructions of the party on work in the army. These comrades literally from the first days of service began to identify progressively thinking officers and soldiers. In a short time they managed to attract dozens of people. In Libana, comrades Ignatov and Rusev established contact with the Yugoslav partisans, agreed on the time and place of the battalion's transition to their side. Just then the battalion commander went on vacation, and the management of all battalion affairs was actually in the hands of our people. Using this favourable circumstance, comrades Ignatov and Rusev managed to arrange that the battalion was sent against the Serbian partisan brigade, which was in the village of Prikupshilica. There the battalion went over to the partisans, and soon, in the presence of many inhabitants of the surrounding villages, a solemn ceremony was held for the establishment of the Georgy Dimitrov Brigade. There were 2 battalions in the brigade, about 250 men in total. It is interesting to note that when comrades Ignatov and Rusev announced the transition of the battalion to the partisans, the soldiers unanimously supported them, and of the officers only 3 spoke against. This circumstance largely determined the firmness of the new brigade, its high combat readiness and combat effectiveness. Having conducted dozens of battles against German and Bulgarian military units independently and in cooperation with Serbian partisans, the brigade gained high prestige. In the face of comrades Rusev, Ignatov, Vilev, Bajev, Yordanov and Marinov, most officers and soldiers saw truly popular commanders, was ready to fulfill any of their orders. Discussing this joyful news, we expressed confidence that there would be many more battalions that came over to our side. There are communists everywhere. They work tirelessly, implementing the directives of the party. We could expect that the replenishment of the brigade with 100 new partisans will increase its combat effectiveness. But in fact, it turned out not quite so. Most of these fighters have not been pre-trained, poorly aware of the material part of the weapon, and we, because of the continuous clashes with the enemy, did not have a minute free to train them. The number of the sick was constantly growing, and this had a bad effect on the mood of the healthy. For this reason, in the first days of the campaign we left a group of sick and the most elderly soldiers in the care of George Grigorov, so that he could use them in the future for political work, and the brigade, having passed the villages of Lasina and Kolyunitsa, early in the morning of May 24 went out in the vicinity of the village of Kosovo Kustendil Okolya. We managed to make the whole way secretly from the enemy. This was helped by a thick fog. There was only one thing that worried of Lasina, a partisan whose wife we had sent back to Sofia some time ago, because she was about to give birth, escaped during a break. He must have longed for his wife, so he ran away, though with a machine gun, which was attached to him. What a warrior! And yet Sandanski Maizovatsia WT said among themselves fighters. At least he left his machine gun behind. In Kosovo, which was part of Comrade Radenko Vidinsky's district, there was an active REOMS organization. During the day we established contact with it. Boris Mapov, Veen Krumov and other comrades came to us. On our instructions they immediately sent scouts to the village of Trecliano. It was market day there. At the same time, the brigade command sent a partisan to the same place. We wanted to compare the information collected by him with the information that would be delivered by the REMS. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we at headquarters knew everything we were interested in. Apart from the police garrison, the fascists had no other forces in the village of Trecliano. That is why we decided to ambush one couple on the Trecliano-Kosovo highway and move the brigade to Kosovo and occupy it before daylight. There we expected to feed the soldiers, stock up on food, rest and move on at midnight. Everything turned out as we planned. There were no unpleasant surprises. But only when we moved onward, it turned out that we had chosen an unsuccessful guide from the locals. Fearing that we would not be discovered by the police, he led the column into such a backwoods, where it is difficult to get through in the daytime, and even in such an impenetrable darkness, and even more so. A thicket of hawthorn, blackthorn, and something else prickly, deep ravines, narrow crevices. We got, as they say, to the very end. Only by morning we got out of this place. The dawn found us near the highway Trecljano, Divlilja. It was difficult to hide there. There was only small shrubbery around. We were discovered by peasants who started herding their cattle early in the morning and by passers-by on the highway, though it was unpleasant, but we had to detain them all. There was no other way out. There could be a traitor among. In the evening we let them go, and we moved to a sheep barn. The shepherds there were without bread. We waited until they milked and boiled milk, drank a mug and started walking towards Tishak Height. This way was also very hard for us. Everything there is strewn with blocks of limestone which literally eats shoes. In the end, many of us had to walk barefoot, and we had no spare shoes. Tishak is opposite the village of Vrana Stina and is a wide plateau, which from the eastern edge is overgrown with oak trees and bushes. It is separated from the village by the Treklejanska River. For many centuries it has made its way into the rocks, making them impregnable. The western slopes of Tishak are also stony. Meltwaters and rains have hollowed out many fancifully shaped scour holes, grooves, hollows, and even tunnels in the rocks. Break, the fatigue had worn off. Without waiting for breakfast, they settled down and quickly fell asleep. Near our camping place there was a koshra of one faithful man. As we learned, a participant of the events of 1923, I set up a combat guard and assigned on duty the couple of Georgia Tanisov. At the same time, I ordered our intendant Todor Strigachev to feed the soldiers lunch before 12 o'clock. Todor is a smart guy. Soon he brought a dozen or two lambs and goats, the property of some German supplier. He got both flour and milk. He had long had a skillful cook in mind. In the courtyard of the barn the fires began to smoke. White smoke rose to the sky. The smell of roasted meat was appetizing. Preparations for dinner were in full swing. After a long grueling hike, a hot lunch would be a real feast for us. Before returning to headquarters, Zaitan and I checked the posts. Everything was in order. Zaitan went to rest and I decided to shave. Just as I soaped my cheeks, a fighter jet appeared in the sky. It made 2 circles and flew off in an easterly direction. A few minutes later, the fighter guard reported that from the southwest appeared military columns, which are clearly headed for the Koshara. Hastily wiping the soap foam off my face, I pushed the razor and everything else into a bag and ordered the day watchman to raise the men on alert and ordered the duty couple to take up a position on a high ridge perpendicular to the approaching enemy. There was no doubt that the airplane had detected us. After a short consultation at headquarters, we decided to withdraw the brigade to the heights east of the village of Vrana Stena because Tishak gave the enemy a number of advantages. Here the enemy could surround us and then impose a protracted battle in disadvantageous conditions for us. To implement the decision, we had to. First, take measures to ensure the safety of our rear, and secondly, to quickly overcome the valley of the Treklianskaya River, parallel to which ran the highway from the station Zemen to the village Trekliapo. On this section of the highway there was an inn, and in Zemen, according to our information, there was not only a police, but also an army garrison. At any moment they could be moved against us in cars, while Peter Madanov was removing the posts. The duty couple stopped the enemy about 300 meters from our camp, and the main forces of the brigade in column headed for the river. In the neighborhood of the Koshara, to the southeast of it, rose another height which was tactically convenient for the enemy. If he succeeded in occupying it, our withdrawal would be thwarted. We realized this in time and sent their Ivan Bonev squads from the 1st Battalion. With him went Slavcho Trykov, the commissar of this battalion, as well as Basil Zarkov and Georgi from the village of Studena. The unit was assigned the task of holding the height until the brigade's complete withdrawal. I went up to the height as well. We took a convenient position and opened fire. The enemy immediately responded. The exchange of fire had been going on for several minutes, and the enemy had not yet done anything different. We took cover behind huge stones and waited. At last the soldiers got up and, firing as they went, came out. "I'm going to give them a full meal," said Bonev. He and his machine gun lined up behind a rock and fired so much that the soldiers began to fall like rotten pears. "It's a pity to give you such a thrashing," said Bonev, pulling the trigger, "but what can you do? Otherwise you won't get through. Let them realize that they can't take a partisan position," said Slavcho Trajov. "There's no need now. They're lying low," Ivan answered. "Why waste ammunition? When they come up, I'll greet them again." At first I thought to stay with them until the whole brigade withdrew, but now, seeing that they would not retreat a step without me, I decided to catch up with the headquarters to check how things were going there. Leaping through the bushes, I came across 2 groups of stragglers. One was tearing a roast lamb to pieces, the other a large loaf of bread. They could easily have been captured or under enemy fire. I took them with me. The brigade left the neighbourhood of the Koshara. Now the soldiers were crossing the river, crossing the highway. Some of them were already climbing the opposite slope, from where it was a short walk to the outskirts of the village of Vranastena. We met several women heading for the cattle pens. The last one, leaning on a stick, was a hunched old woman who could hardly move her leg. "Hold it up, boys, hold it up," she shouted. "They, the dogs, will surround you and kill you on the spot." "No, don't be afraid, mother," I said. "We won't give them away." We passed the river and got to the road. Several peasants appeared from the inn talking to the partisans. Between them rushed some man in a white apron, asking the commander. "There he is." A young partisan answered him curtly and pointed at Bulgarinov. "What happened?" Bulgarinov asked. "I have an oven full of bread," whispered the man in the white apron. "But I'm afraid to just give it to you. What if someone informs on me?" "What do you suggest?" "You arrest me," replied the baker. "What do you take us for, robbers?" angrily said Bulgarinov. "Whoever is a true patriot and considers our struggle his own should fear nothing. We are not here to arrest you for your bread." The man in the white apron blushed and stepped aside. From the highway, the brigade took a narrow path that twisted between the acacia trees. It led us to a group of white one-story houses. Women and children gathered in front of them, offering the partisans water, bread, sour milk, or something else. At that time, 2 enemy fighter planes swept over the Mahela. But no matter how terrifyingly the bullets they fired whistled, the peasant women did not tremble. They had met the partisans for the first time and wanted to feed and water them at all costs. I didn't see a single guy in the mahal. It turned out that they had gone with our lead group to show the way. When we all gathered at the watershed, the guys told us that there was both a party organization and an RM's organization in the village, that the peasants were eagerly awaiting the partisans, and that just 2 days before, comrades Radenko, Vidinsky and Boyka had held special meetings on how to organize a meeting of the partisans. The area above the village of Vranastena is convenient for parking. There are rocks, forest and bushes. We stayed there until evening. Our comrades, who were left on Tichek to cover the brigade's withdrawal, joined us safe and sound. We distributed the remaining food and moved on. "We have survived another day," the soldiers said among themselves. "Let's see what tomorrow will bring." And everyone secretly hoped that tomorrow would be easier than this day. It got dark. Evening coolness quickly displaced the heat of the day. The brigade lined up in battalion formation on the country road. Now the column was led by Grigor Ilyev from Pernik. Before joining the brigade, he had been a party worker in Radomir district, and to some extent knew the local places. I must say that, although I had not been able to follow the route of the brigade before, I was able to orient myself quite easily up to the village of Trekliano, but I had no idea about the area beyond the village of Ranastena, so now I had to rely entirely on guides, be they partisans, Jataks, or random people. For the partisans, it is very important what kind of guide they have, whether he knows the way accurately or roughly. After all, in the first case, he can always bypass the places convenient for an enemy ambush. Well, and if you do run into it, we'll take the column without loss. With such a guide, fighters feel calm, confident, and, as a rule, less tense. Therefore, the choice of a guide is of great importance for the success of the campaign. First, Grigor Ilyev led us through wheat fields, then through a huge orchard, then through some thorny bushes, until we came to a stone quarry, past which the highway ran. It led the brigade to the village of Jabliano. Keeping silence, we passed through a wide village street, turned left, on a square covered with sand, and then from the head of the column came a signal to stop. It was followed by a nair, danger ahead. It turned out that our patrol had come upon the village guard-likes, disarmed them, and, after warning the villagers not to report anything to anyone, took the prisoners under a shelter from which they could not see the column, and kept them there until the whole brigade had passed. When we crossed the river Struma and crossed the railway line Radomir, Zemen, near the village of Zablijano, the column got on the highway again. We travelled along it for a while and then turned onto a winding path through a field of tall rye. The path led us to a mahala whose houses were hidden among fruit trees. Not reaching the mahala, the column stopped. Grigor Ilyev reported that now we should take one of the locals as a guide. With Grigor and Bulgarinov, we entered one of the houses. We were met by a young man in the clothes of a railroad worker who had fallen asleep and was very frightened. He told us that he had long wanted to meet the partisans, that the Communist Party was dearer to him than anything else, that he had never believed in a German victory, and that the Fascists were an eyesore to him. Finally, he volunteered to do everything that could help the success of our struggle. On this dark night, of course, it was most important to us that he show us the way. He agreed, reassured his wife by saying he would be back soon, and led the column through the Mahala. Though we made a lot of noise, the dogs didn't bark too much, and how could they not make a noise when you can't see anything at 5 paces? The road on which the railroader led us was strewn with many stones, and under our feet they rolled down the slope with a clatter. The horse, loaded with a radio, was now making a great deal of noise. Not only he was beating his hoofs on the stones, but he was also snorting with fatigue. His comrades Ivan Pechev, Pavel Tavulapov, Evtim Panchev and Stefan Vasilev were following him. We assigned them to a special group to guard the radio. In about an hour, the head of the column found itself on a flat clearing overgrown with ferns. The forest surrounding it on all sides, in the darkness, looked like a black wall, which seemed to hide all sorts of surprises and trouble. Somewhere behind this wall, the road was hidden. "You wait here, and I'll go and check," asked the railroader, and disappeared into the dense forest. We waited for 5 minutes, 10, 20. The railroader was gone. We whistled quietly, shouted. No answer. The forest towered before us, silent and dark. Everything had long ago fallen asleep in it. "Hey, he ran away, son of a dog," said Bulgarinov. "If he betrayed us, tomorrow we'll have enough fiddling with creepers for the whole day." This railroader taught us a good lesson. Said the commissar of the brigade. "Now we must never trust the conductors blindly." Where are we now? We unfolded a geographical map which we had borrowed from a school. Only the largest peaks and settlements, the main highways and railroad lines were marked on this map. The point at which we now found ourselves was surely hidden beneath the general brown background marking the mountains. By the pale light of a hand flashlight, we found the village of Zeman, through which 2 lines, black and blue, stretched contiguously. In this place, the Struma River and the Sofia, Kyustendil Railroad cut off a piece of the Konjov Ridge, which separates the Radomir and Kyustendil valleys. It stretches towards the town of Dupnitsa, one of the points of our route. On the map, everything was easy, if only we knew where we were. But without a compass, without a guide, how could we orient ourselves? And if we move blindly, won't we end up in Zemina, in the very jaws of the wolf? As it happened more than once in moments of difficulty, all eyes turned to Bulgarinov. He was not only the oldest of us, but also the most experienced, resourceful and steady. "Move behind me." He ordered and led the column along a narrow path through a dense forest. Soon we got out on a well-travelled road, on which we walked until dawn. And when dawn broke, a group of fighters went on reconnaissance and soon reported that they had found a suitable place for a day's rest, a dominating height over the terrain, overgrown on the slopes with young oak trees. It gave us excellent opportunities for both camouflage and observation. The battalion commanders distributed the bivouac areas among themselves, gave orders concerning the rest of the men and camouflage, and settled down to rest themselves. The forest, with its soft grass and foliage gilded by the first rays of sunlight, beckoned to sleep. In a few minutes everything around was quiet. Only our horse Belcho broke the silence, plucking young shoots and crunching them juicily. But the brigade commanders still had little to do, although our legs were buzzing with fatigue, and we were also attracted by the soft grass like a magnet. We still had to study the area from the point of view of possible defence and withdrawal. So, while the battalion settled down to rest, the full staff went up to the summit. Now, in the light of the beginning of the day, the whole terrain from here was clearly visible, and lay before us as in the palm of our hands. With the help of partisans from Radomir villages, we easily oriented ourselves. Not far away were the white houses of the villages of Ijelitsa and Izvor, and we had a lot of natives of the latter in our brigade. The thick and spreading bush, from behind which we kept watch, covered all the passers-by. From left to right, studying the surroundings in detail, I noticed a dozen or 2 soldiers in the distance. Having undressed, they had settled down in the warm sunshine and were obviously beating lice. I pointed them to Bulgarinov. He looked there and whispered to Zlatan. "Let's quickly send a couple of fighters. Let them scout for more soldiers, and then we'll decide what to do next. Bulgarinov put binoculars to his eyes, waved them from side to side, then suddenly froze. Ah, damned. They are coming straight at us. At that time, a distant hum of an airplane was heard. It was rapidly approaching, and then it appeared above us. You see, we've been betrayed, P, said Bulgarinov. This one up there is inspecting the area, and if he notices us, will immediately inform his men. If he mistakes these Wosh boys for partisans, he might fire on them, Zlatan suggested. I see other columns, said Ninko with concern in his voice, who had been ordered to follow those whom Bulgarinov had spotted. Indeed, the enemy was pulling up forces on all sides, and it was not difficult to discern his plan. We had no other choice but to raise the alarm and prepare for retreat, and maybe even for battle. Comrade Bulgarinov accepted my proposal. It was necessary to wake up the fighters. They had just fallen asleep, and the first sleep was so sweet. However, the situation did not dispose to sentimentality. The column had to quickly prepare to withdraw from the area before the enemy closed the ring of encirclement. Every minute was now of great value. Only I signalled to move, as 30 paces from us on the road flashed 6 soldiers in helmets. Clearly a patrol of some unit, looking for us. We lay low and let the patrol pass. When it became distant, we quickly crossed the road, setting up guards on both sides of the road. After a while we came to a wide clearing. An old peasant was herding cows in it. We took him with us to show us the way. This time, even though it was still light, Zlatan made sure that the guide would not run away by simply tying him to him. After several kilometers, we entered the village of Izvor. From here, the guide of the brigade became a native of this village, Alyosha, a liaison of the 2nd Battalion commanded by Georgy Gotsev. It was always very risky for us to move in the daytime, especially in an area full of troops, police and gendarmes. But in addition to the Kustendil regiment, other units were pulled here. They were watching us, had full opportunity to ambush us, to fire on us from convenient positions. What had tormented us before now looked not the most difficult. The difficulties were just beginning. If we moved in one direction, we would be shelled. If we chose another direction, it would be the same here because there was no height or slope that was not occupied by the troops or the police. We had to get out to the highway leading to Kustendil. As long as we were walking through the forest, we felt relatively safe. But as soon as there was a clearing ahead, the enemy immediately showered us with bullets. Especially dangerous was that bend of the highway, where the road to the village of Ugliazzi branches off from it. As soon as the soldiers ahead of us appeared on that bend, several machine guns opened fire on them. They were hitting right on that small clearing, which the column had to cross in order to get down to the highway. It was impossible to raise one's head. We had to go around the clearing, and this caused breaks in the column, mixed it up. Those of the fighters who had not yet got out on the highway moved through the forest, and those who had already found themselves on the road, there was no way back. They had only one thing to get out of the shelling faster. After the turn, the highway went into a deep gully with very steep slopes. Nearby, a rivulet was winding whimsically. In 2 places, 100 meters from each other, it crossed the highway under wooden bridges. An old watermill clattered between them. The headquarters was also moving along the highway. Only Grigor Iliv was absent. Probably he stayed with some of the battalion to help it to get out of the difficult situation. We passed the mill and approached the second bridge. Suddenly a military truck appeared in front of us at low speed. Soldiers were peering out of the back. We fired at the truck, it stopped. The soldiers sprinkled on the road and quickly disappeared under the bridge. With a few fighters, I crept up to them. The soldiers had not yet had time to prepare for battle when we pointed automatic rifles at them and shouted, "Surrender." They didn't resist. They dropped their weapons. While we were collecting the spoils, comrades from the headquarters together with a group of fighters passed the bridge and turned left off the highway. My group followed. We crossed the river, crossed a green clearing and found ourselves on a road that led us to a sown field, surrounded on 3 sides by forest. On the ascent we caught up with some men from the first group and overtook them, telling them to follow us. But the enemy's machine guns were beating ahead, and the men were frightened. They pressed themselves against a high wattle next to the road and almost did not move from their places. The radio operator Pachev was in this group. He got up and followed me. Savilanov had already passed together with Bulgarinov. The gate in which we were climbing was full of scour holes and looked like a dried-up river. Suddenly bullets hit the ground in front of us. 3 machine guns were firing, well camouflaged. They were located somewhere on the opposite slope. It was dangerous to stay on the road. It was necessary to pass the open place as quickly as possible and lie down in a roadside ditch or behind some big stone, and there were many of them. I signalled to the men who were following me to take cover behind a high boundary line and wait until the firing subsided, and the 2 of us and radio operator Peshev crawled to a large rock and lay down behind it. Below and a little to the right in a dry hollow, the comrades from the first group huddled together. More and more fighters were joining them. Behind the rock Peshev and I lay only a few minutes, but they seemed to us long hours. Bullets were whizzing over our heads, hitting the stone, shooting sparks out of it. Then the machine guns began to hit us with bursting bullets. Behind the stone it became even hotter. Next door to us, Penka, the printer, and one of the soldiers who had just been taken prisoner were not far behind the weave. I saw a group of fighters, among them Ivan Bonev. In his hands shone a brand new Bren machine gun, and 2 more machine gun barrels were sticking out farther away. "Ivan," I shouted with all my might. "What are you looking at? Why don't you silence the bastards?" "Yes, comrade commander," answered Bopev, and, turning his head, shouted curtly. "Listen to my command. Aim 7. On the 3 enemy machine guns behind the boundary opposite us. I am—" A moment later, our machine guns started talking. Fountains of dust rose above the boundary from behind which the enemy was firing. The fascist immediately fell silent. There was a small lull. It was necessary to look for a way out of the situation, to assemble the brigade. After all, in fact, here was only the headquarters. Peshev and I moved across the boundary line, sometimes by short runs and sometimes by crawling. Bulgarinov's group also moved. It moved to where our machine gunners were. Peter Mladenov's group, which had taken shelter among the rocks to the northeast of us, also moved. However, the fascists did not leave us alone, again opened fire. The bursting bullets were flying thickly. It made maneuvering very difficult, but there was no time to wait. We did not know what else the enemy had prepared for us in this unfamiliar terrain. In the next half hour, a significant group of fighters came out from under fire, but most of the brigade was still missing. In addition to Penka and the soldier captive, Pesho, the brigade cook, and Ivan from the village of Sekva were killed. The young partisan Sonia was wounded. The soldiers sorrowfully told about the death of Pesho the cook. With a group of captured soldiers, he came to us in February and so quickly got used to partisan life, was so disciplined that he served as an example for all. With all his soul, he hated the fascists. Before he died, Pesho said, "Better you kill me, comrades, than to fall into the clutches of these bastards alive. Death to fascism, freedom to the people, but whose heart would have allowed it, whose hand would have risen on his own comrade." There was no sign of Belcho. I looked around. Ah, there he was. On the barley field, the hungry horse began to eat the shoots, paying no attention to the fierce shooting. No matter how we called him, no matter how we baited him, he did not even turn a deaf ear. The walkie-talkie swayed on his back. Someone should get him out of the field, but who would dare to go out in a hail of bullets? "I'll go," Basil Zarkov said modestly. He ran to the horse, grabbed its reins, and, before the enemy had time to realize, took Belcho to a safe place. The radio was saved. For this brave act, Vasil was later commended in front of the brigade. We established communication with other groups. We sent out liaisons. With the help of pre-arranged signals, they were to find the lagging soldiers and lead them to the assembly point. Within an hour, almost the whole brigade was gathered. Only the deputy commissar of the brigade, Grigor Iliv, and a few others were absent. During the firefight, they turned somewhere to the side. We never saw them again. Sonia was severely wounded. The bullet almost hit her eye and pierced her nose. Blood was gushing from the wound, the girl's eyes were sunken and her eyelids were blue. They gave her first aid, but they feared for her life. It was necessary to leave the girl with kind people. Not far away we could see the village of Agliartsi. It was getting ready for bed, not a soul in the streets. The village dogs were quiet, but there were still some lights flickering in the windows. The brigade gathered in the tiny square. I gave orders to which battalion in which mahal to have dinner, determined the hour and the starting point of the next crossing. We also found a reliable, by all impressions, person at whom we could leave Sonia. We told him in detail how to treat her and instructed him to keep her safe. Just in case we warned him that he was responsible for her life with his own head. I'll say at once that he failed to save the girl. It took the fighters several hours to prepare dinner and provisions for the next day. Before midnight, everyone had to eat and gather in the square. Only the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Georgi, got sick, and his contact, Alyosha, did not come by the appointed time. We tried to look for them, to no avail. No one knew in which house they had dinner and where they had gone. We had had to go without them. Moreover, the weather was getting worse. It was about to rain. The plan was to get to a thick forest and wait out the day there, and if the fog fell, then we could advance to the village of Verkhnyaya Koznitsa. No sooner had we left the village, it started to rain. And not just any rain, but torrential. We were soaked to the bone, and the road was so muddy that we couldn't stay on our feet. Besides, it's pitch black. Nobody can see anybody. Communication was maintained only by signals. The soldiers fell down in the mud, got up grumbling, and slowly climbed further up the mountain. Finally it dawned, but what a disappointment. They had put so much effort, exhausted themselves, and there was the village, only 3 kilometers away. The rain had stopped, but a thick fog had descended. It was the only one of all the natural elements that helped us. We got into the forest unnoticed, and then continued the crossing. Here, fortunately, there are endless forests. The whole day we walked without fear. Only in the evening the brigade reached the vicinity of the village of Verkhnyaya Koznitsa. We waited until it got dark, and then we went down to the plain. The need forced us to take the first peasant we met as a guide. The night was not too dark. The moon was shining weakly, which was to our advantage. It was difficult for the enemy to detect us, and we had an opportunity to maneuver. And the terrain up to the German river is comfortable. But still we had to walk a lot and fast, so the men were tired. I'm sure that all the surviving guerrillas remembered this night. It was not even walking, but running. Those who had no training he simply exhausted. The number of laggards kept growing. I tried to help them, but there are a lot of them, and my strength is not unlimited. We, the command staff, never really rest. While others are sleeping or sitting, resting, we need to organize reconnaissance, take care of the food of the fighters, outline a plan for further movement, to provide for the conditions in which, perhaps, we'll have to fight. So we spent several days without sleep, on our feet. Fatigue affects fighters in different ways. Some are tired only physically, and others at such moments fall mood. There are also all sorts of heavy thoughts. If the first should only have a little snack, and they are again full of strength, ready to move on. The second fallen in spirit, dare to desert. That night we were missing several men. In this regard, I would like to emphasize with what extraordinary resilience and tenacity held our partisans. Not a single thought of running away or surrendering to the enemy. Although many of them were physically much weaker, I would even say more exhausted than men, they all, without exception, withstood the most severe trials and tribulations. The accelerated march of that night caused discontent among many of the fighters. People began to get nervous. There were voices that it was time to take a break. But the command accurately calculated the time and distance and insistently sought to bring the brigade to the Rila Massif. Its fate depended on it. Late arrival exposed the brigade to a terrible risk. After all, not from good motives, the enemy from everywhere pulls forces to this area. Therefore, we did not pay attention to the dew, abundantly wet crops and grass in the meadows, quickly, not particularly choosing where the shallower, crossed the ford of rivers, did not notice the thick dust that enveloped us on the country lanes, did not hear the grumbling of tired to exhaustion partisans. We were almost running like obsessed, forward and forward to Rila. Probably no one had ever been so eager to reach this harsh and proud massif as we were that night, hoping to find in its wilds a shelter and at least some peace. But alas, Rila proved so inhospitable. Comrade Commander, I can't take it any more. Will there be an end to this diabolical race? Asked Georgi Staminov from the village of Radovo. Just a little more, Georgi, just a little more. Clench your soul, hold on, I answered. I've been clutching it all the way, this damned soul, and now I can't. Neither my soul nor my legs can take it any more. Come on, lean on it. It will be easier to walk. I tried to cheer him up, but he was exhausted. As soon as I let him go, he would immediately sit down, and if he sat down, he would leave me alone. Several times I lifted him up. Together we caught up with the column. But he was not the only one. There is a partisan woman moaning, pale as a sheet, complaining that she has a pain on her right side under her ribs. She has no strength left. I had to linger near her. She went too, with great difficulty. "Well, are we coming up?" asked each other fighters. "Can't you see the mountains?" was heard angrily in reply. "As soon as we reach them, it means the end of the crossing. It is very far to them. Will we get there alive?" someone said with despair. "What's the matter, buddy? Come on, pull yourself up. Look at that. The girls are 3 times weaker than you and they don't whimper. But you, a man, and a very young one at that, cry out like a baby," one of the commanders told him. He became silent and quickened his step. "There you go. You can, it turns out. And that's why you're whining. Others, in order to get first-hand information, ask questions to the guide. It's close, guys. It's close." By Demeter from the village of Corkina, whom we took as a guide, calmed them down. Just a little more. He was pacing at the head of the column, not so prominent, but tireless. "Here we came to the highway to Custundil," he explained. "But here we must take the right as soon as possible, or we might get caught by the police. The matter is clear. We must hurry." The men tensed up, their whole being. All their strength was focused on one thing, even at the last breath, but to fulfill the order. And the men went, almost ran. Here, at the very roadside, a spring gurgles invitingly. The water in it is fast and clear, like a tear. Many would like to put their cracked lips to the silver stream, which was wasting water, flooding the road, but discipline is stronger than thirst. No one was allowed to leave his place in the column without permission. The slightest delay could turn to blood, and the soldiers, passing by the spring, even turned away not to look at it. Soon we crossed the irrigation canal of Balanovo village. For a few more kilometers, and we will come to the ford across the River German, said the guide. "And as soon as we cross it, there you are in Rila." "Are there any villages there?" "Huh, uncle?" someone asked. "There are. How could there not be? Not far from the river is the village of Stars Dol. There you will find food, rest, and then trust in God." Balapovo had long ago fallen into slumber. The small water mill we passed by was asleep in the bushes. It was quiet around. Only the river was murmuring, and sometimes the silence was broken by the soldiers who, having dozed off on the way, stumbled on the stones at the bottom of the river, slipped noisily into the water, then rose up, remembering all the saints. I heard Bogaranov's voice. He was reprimanding someone on the move. I realized that it was about Zlatan and hurried to them to find out what else had happened. Zlatan, it must be said, did not know how to treat people nicely. He shouted at them, threatened. The same kind of offence was today, for which he was reprimanded by Bulgarinov. And in general, Zlatan had a lot of other things. During the battle at Tumba, he left the battlefield and went to the nearest Mahala, setting a bad example for others. During the campaign, when near the village of Izvor we came under fire from the Punishers, Zlatan panicked, ran away, followed by the whole group. All this was accumulating, and now, apparently, the cup of Bulgarinov's patience was overflowing, and he exploded. What can I say in such a mess, which we got into? Everyone is not easy. People become irritable, irascible, intemperate. Actually, Bulgarinov was an example of restraint. But even he sometimes had a temp. He would suddenly flare up, get hot, swear, and then step back. There were many inveterate smokers in the brigade. One of them was Bulgarinov, but during the long trek all their stocks of smoke came to the end, and it was impossible to buy some in the settlements. Then dry leaves were used. At rest stops I heard Poncho Panov saying to Bulgarinov, "Maybe Ivan, let's have a smoke." Bulgarinov replied dejected, "There's nothing." And though they knew perfectly well that there was not a crumb of tobacco left in their pockets, but still they went through them again, turned them out, shook them out, added a little leaf to the pinch of dust obtained in this way, which absorbed the smell of cigarettes that had once lain there, rolled up a microscopic cigar, and the usual sacred action began. One would puff, pass it to the other, the latter to the third, then to the fourth, until the light came close to the lips. How good it is, smokers who, like gypsies when they start to learn to smoke, squatted near Bulgarinov, licked their lips. We came to the River German. It was swollen after the recent rains, but it was still possible to cross it. From the strongest fighters we formed strike groups which moved first. They passed safely. Behind them, Next to the river, repeating its curves, round the highway and the railway line to the station Gorna Jumaya. We crossed them and descended into a quiet, waterless clearing, which, to all appearances, had recently been swept by torrential torrents. In a few minutes, the soldiers who had been trailing the column disappeared into the clearing. Only our guide remained on the opposite bank. He waved us goodbye and walked back along the beaten path. We greeted him with words of gratitude. Dawn was already dawning. By the time we got out of the clearing, it was dawn. The sky in the east was clear, not a single cloud. A warm southern breeze was blowing. Everything foreshadowed a great sunny day. Here at last is the long-awaited village. We count the houses, the first, the second, the third, Where are the other houses? I asked some sleepy uncles standing at the gate. They are all here, they said. Are there only 7 houses in your whole village? Only 7. Najek, can we find food here? We are starving ourselves. We trade in tobacco, but they buy it from us cheap. We get 200 grams of corn a day. That's for us and the cattle. Life is worse than ever, but what can we do? What are you doing to make your life better? Bulgarinov asked. Can you do much with your bare hands? We have only 1 soul left. We should not give up, then we can do a lot. We must fight like them. Look at him. Bulgarinov pointed at Gosho, the youngest of our fighters, 15 years old, but he went to fight so that he could live like a human being. And he will win, added Ninko Stefanov. He is sure of that? Gosho stuck out his chest, dashingly threw his automatic rifle behind his back and smiled. For the sake of this smile, he seemed to have gathered the last of his strength, but it literally lit up his face. Do you see this one? Bulgarinov pointed at Basil Zarkov, who was just passing by in the column. He is a non-commissioned officer. He left the fascist barracks, became a partisan, and these girls, and this woman came to us with 2 children. He pointed at Aunt Seta Yurikova. The sick man. These are all people of your circle, but in their souls they have a deadly hatred for the fascists. It drives all of us, and we will not give up until we achieve victory. All this the zone commander said with such confidence that, as it seemed to me, planted its spark in the soul of the peasant who had lost all hope. And if the fascists ask you if we have passed here, what will you answer them? Someone from the headquarters spoke to him. Of course, I told them, hold on to your pocket. I still have my brains. I'm not crazy to betray my own. While we were talking, the whole brigade passed through the Mahalla. The banner carried by Pravda Ruskova was flying far ahead, and we hurried after. Not only bread we did not find in this tiny village, nor did we learn anything encouraging. On the contrary, we were puzzled by the news that the police had ordered to drive away all the cattle from the mountain pastures, and the inhabitants were strictly forbidden to go up to the mountains. In 6 days we had travelled 200 kilometres from Kalna, an average of 35 kilometres a day. People were exhausted and hungry. They could only eat once a day. Under such tension, of course, it could not make up for the expended energy. Day by day their strength melted. The soldiers did not gather wild onions and sorrel on their breaks not for the sake of fare. Though they tried to dull their hunger with this, they hoped that even a little, but still grass would support them. Grass, said Joao. I will eat stones too, if only to exhaust myself. I joined the partisans to fight the enemy, not to whine. And the enemy is not only in a blue overcoat and polished police boots. He's hungry, thirsty, cold, everything. Look, I'm chewing sorrel and I sense its strength. I need it to defeat a policeman who defends fascism, to convince a soldier who holds a rifle at his foot, to derail a train that carries ammunition for the Germans to the Eastern Front, to achieve victory